Welcome to this beginner course on Inkscape. I already have a giant Inkscape playlist on my channel, but most of these tutorials I've made with versions 1.2 and 1.1. And with 1.3, Inkscape changed its layout a little bit here and there. So I decided to make this beginner video. It's a full course, so it contains a couple of tutorials. I'll try to make timestamps. You can find them in the video description to jump to specific chapters of this video. I also want to make this course a little bit more interactive, so I'm going to give you tasks to solve or to recreate yourself, and afterwards you can check how I did it in this video. In general, the videos in my playlist, they still apply, so you can still use them for Inkscape 1.3. But things look a little bit different here, and there might be different tools now in this newer version. But if you have a specific question, refer to the playlist, and for the most part you will get your question answered. But let us now start with this version. First up, when you start Inkscape, this is what it's going to look like by default. But to actually have that done, we need to install it first, obviously. So your first task is to go to inkscape.org right here. There you'll find the download button. You want to use the current stable version. As I've mentioned, it's 1.3 in our case. Inkscape redirects me to the best place that's right now available to download the version. If you have problems here or you want to download it, for example, for Linux or for Mac, just go to Unstable Development Snapshots. And there you'll find a history right here on the right hand side for versions. Click on 1.3 and here you'll find not only Windows but also Mac, Linux, and you can download it for a specific system. Once you've done that, make sure to install it and then start it. And then you should see this window and we can start using Inkscape. Now that we've installed it, let us create the basic settings that I'm going to use for my videos. You should use the same if you want to follow this tutorial. Let us go to Preferences under Edit. First up, we want to change the language under Interface. I'll set it to English. It's US English, but it has many other languages installed. When you pick a different one, you have to restart Inkscape so that this new language is shown. So if you want to change that to your native language, do so now, then come back and we'll go to View. I've got widescreen checked. If you uncheck it, these right hand icons will pop to the top. We'll keep it on right. Secondly, you can have a full screen right here. And you want to check the display mode. I've set it to normal. Let me just show you what happens if we have a different one. I'll create a simple element like a rectangle with a black fill. And if I switch to outline, you won't see the fill anymore. So make sure that this is set to normal. I'll delete my rectangle. Let's go back to our preferences. You can also change the themes right here. I use an inverse high contrast. High contrast without the inverse is white. I think inverse is better for our eyes, so I'll keep that. And then you want to check right here your autosave functions. Especially when you work on bigger projects, you want this to be enabled. Sometimes sadly Inkscape crashes. And if you enable autosave, you will be able to save at least some of your work. You can set a time interval here. I'm going to keep it to 10 minutes, but definitely make sure that the box is checked. Let's go to File, Document Properties, and here you can set this center page, which is going to pop up by default. It's an A4 with a drop shadow, so right here. You can change the format if you want to. I'm going to use this A4 for our tutorial, but maybe you want to use this one for video HD, and then just change the orientation below height. But as I've said, I'm going to stick to A4, so make sure you've got the same. And it's set to millimeters in my case, but Don't let it confuse you. A4 is A4, no matter the units that we use. Let's go to guides. We can simply create guides around our current page. And there you can see them. We can delete them here as well. Show guides is active, but we also have a log all guides function right here. So if I create new guides and I log them, my cursor isn't changing anymore when I hover over these, and I can't move them anymore. When I uncheck it, I can. For now, we will just delete all guides and have show guides checked. Let's go to grids. Here you can add a grid. By default, it's a rectangular and an axonometric, and you can remove them here or adjust them to your liking. Axonometric is this one where you have an angle. We will start with no grid at all. Let me close this window. And this is where we want to start with our Inkscape beginner course. So as I've said, make sure that you've got these settings set up yourself, and then we can continue. Let us get familiar with some basic functions. Most important is you're going to use Ctrl Z a lot, which is undo. You can find it under Edit. Let me just create a rectangle, and I left click on these swatches down here to change the fill color. And if I want to go one step back, I just press Ctrl Z and it's green again. Or I go to Edit, Undo, it's green again. And I can also redo the last step. So Ctrl Z might be the most important shortcut to use in Inkscape, because even if you are very familiar with it and you're a seasoned designer, illustrator, you're going to make a lot of mistakes, and Ctrl Z comes in handy. So make sure that you are familiar with this shortcut and keep it in mind whenever you use Inkscape. Let us check the right hand side. All of these icons you can find elsewhere in Inkscape. So for example, here we have cut and copy, Ctrl X, Ctrl C. You can also go to Edit, and there are copy and cut as well. And you can also find New, which is under File, New, Ctrl N, and this opens a new document. So this is now called Document 2. Let me close it. We're back into Document 1. You can open files, save, print, import, export, and here are undo and redo once again. For many tools in Inkscape, you can find them in various positions. Let us simply use new, but this time we'll use new from template. So there are a couple of templates stored in Inkscape by default. If you don't know specific size, let's say for social media, for icon design, for screens or video, you can find it here. Let me choose 1280 x 720 and I create from template. A new document is being created. And right here, the page has now the size that's needed for YouTube videos. Let me close this and we'll return to our A4 page. One more thing, I'm going to talk about that when we've reached the Shapebuilder tool. This one's new for Inkscape 1.3, and I'm going to talk about it when I'm going to introduce the Shapebuilder tool, but you can find it right here. It's the third tool from the top. Let us once again use the rectangle tool, and if I want to close my document now, it gives me a warning message because I haven't saved anything. So don't worry if you by mistake click on X, you will get this warning message by default. You can confirm it that you want to close it by close without saving. You can cancel or you can save. In our case, I just want to cancel so that we stay in our new document right here. You've certainly seen these color swatches already. You can just left click on them and this will change the fill color, which is also indicated at the bottom left. And if you double click on this, your fill and stroke menu will pop up. Here you have a fill. It's going to get adjusted right away here in this color wheel. And you also have a stroke paint. For now, nothing is selected, but if I hold Shift and then left click on a color swatch, this will be added. For example, black. And you can now also see at the bottom we have two circles. One for the fill, one for the stroke. The one for the fill is filled and the one for stroke only has a stroke. So this is how you can differentiate between them. But you can also adjust them right here using the color wheel. I'm on the stroke paint. I left click on this one and drag it to white. And now if you use the color wheel, it will always stay white. Now it's black and it will always stay that way. But now I drag it to turquoise. And if I rotate the wheel now, it's going to change. So we have pink right here. Let me increase the width under stroke style. Now we can see it better. So this changes the color. This one's always black no matter how I rotate it. This one's always white no matter how I rotate it. Same goes for the fill. This is blue. I rotate it and it changes. The other ones are black and white. Let us close this menu, we'll come back to it later. And I'll talk a little bit about these color swatches. You can use up and down because most sets have more than just the shown color swatches. And you can click on this option right here and more sets will be revealed. By default, we're going to use Inkscape default, but just to show you a different one, I use blues. And you can left click on them or hold Shift and left click. Let me use Ubuntu. And again, left click and Shift left click changes the color for fill and stroke. We can also configure that, but this is just something for the display. So tile size, aspect, stretch to fill. This is just going to change the appearance of our swatches and it has got nothing to do with the actual functionality. Same goes for border and rows. For now, I would just advise to leave that alone. I'll close this and I'll go back to Inkscape default. As I've said, we're going to use this for our tutorial here. So make sure you've got the same, but you should if this is the first time that you're using Inkscape. Let us go back to fill and stroke. As I've said, double click at the bottom left will open it, or we can go to Object, Fill and Stroke, Shift Ctrl F. We have fill, stroke paint and stroke style. The color wheel, you've seen it already. And here's always the hex code. In this case it's RGBA. A is for the alpha channel, RGB is for red, green, blue. In the drop down you can, for example, change it to CMYK if you need it. You can see these swatches. It's for flat color, which is the basic fill, but you can also add gradients, linear, radial or mesh. And there is also a pattern fill. I'm going to talk about this stuff later on when we actually apply gradients and patterns to objects. Before we move on to the stroke paint, I want you to recreate a rectangle of any size. Just use the rectangle tool, left click drag, and then use the hex code for fill that I'm using here. When we switch to stroke paint, it looks almost exactly the same. Even the stroke paint has a flat color, and we can also apply gradients to it. We also have a hex code for it down here, and it's not just 6 digits, as there's also the alpha channel added. Let us talk about stroke style. You've already seen width, I've used it. You can also use minus and plus for it. It's set to millimeters. You can change the units right here. Dashes is already interesting because there are some presets, and there's also an offset right next to it. Let me go down with the size, and I make this a dashed outline. Forget about join for now, we need the cap. Round cap, you can see it already. It makes the ending and the beginning of these caps round. The difference between the other two, let me go to a different style like this. So here's the butt cap and here's the square cap. The square is just a little bit bigger. So butt cap cuts off the shape earlier. Square makes it a rectangle, butt cap a square. And as I've said, for your first project, use a width of 2, use this dashes style, make it a butt cap. Stroke paint is given right here, fill right there, and use the rectangle tool. This is the 4th tool from the top, right here on the left. Just left click on it, then left click drag on the canvas, so our A4 image. What Inkscape does by default is it stores the last style, so if I create new rectangles, they will have the same dashes, the same fill and stroke color. If I change the fill to this color, and I now left click drag and create a new one, this is stored. Don't forget to create your rectangle. As I've said, the size doesn't really matter. It's important that you use fill and stroke in the fill and stroke menu and change the stroke style to a dash style. Let us talk about the first tool. The tools, you can find them on the left hand side, and I've already used the selector tool right here, but it's just for selections. You can left click drag and have stuff selected, short keys S. But the first real tool that lets us create something that I want to talk about is the rectangle tool. But before we do, let us quickly talk about snapping. On the right hand side you can see this icon and an arrow to the right of it. You can open this. Definitely make sure that the box for enable snapping is checked. There are quick icons right here, or the advanced mode for all of the stuff in detail. When we need it, we're going to refer to it. For now, just make sure that enable snapping is active by checking this box, and now we can use the rectangle tool. Short key for it is R. When you left click drag, you can create such rectangles. It saves the last style. Let me make it black. I hold shift click on this red X to get rid of the stroke. We have 3 points for rectangles, and you can left click drag. Top left, bottom right are for adjusting. And the top right is a circle, so it's different. It gives you the option to add rounded corners to your rectangles. So it looks a little bit different. When you misclick, like I did right here, a new rectangle is being created, and you can't just select the old one with the rectangle tool. You need the select tool for it, and then left click on it, reactivate the rectangle tool, and now you have these options again to add rounded corners or readjust it. You can also press S, which was the short key for the selector tool, and then activate the rectangle tool, and you can adjust the smaller one as well. Selector tool also allows you to select multiple objects like this. Let me delete all of it. I select it, delete key, they're gone. I'll create a new rectangle. I'll make the corners sharp, and I'll give it a different fill. You already know how that works. Let us create yet another one. But this time I hold Ctrl when I do. And now it snaps to certain degrees. And at some point you have a 45-degree angle. And this gives you a perfect square. You can also hold Shift, and this will fix the center position. When you release it, the top left is always the fixed point for the rectangle creation. You can also obviously hold Ctrl and Shift at the same time. Here we are at 45 degrees. Width and height are the same, and you can see that on top right here, W width, H is height. You can also adjust them right here via plus and minus. But you have to have your object selected for it to be accessible. Let me adjust it numerically. If you're wondering what Rx and Ry is, this is for the rounded corners. Let me make this bigger again. And now you can see we have dragged these two circles to the left and the bottom by adding a value of 20. I've set mine to millimeters, by the way. You can change the unit up here via the drop down if you need to. The last icon on the right here is simply to make the corners sharp again. So if you click on it, the rounded corners are gone. Let's talk about import and export. These icons are the same as the ones right here under File. When you click on Export, you have a couple of options. You can export the entire document, the page, your selection, but make sure that something is selected or it won't work. And you can also use custom and adjust position and image size. For the most part, you want to have your selection exported. Right here at the bottom left, you can set the position where you want to export it to. Let me call this tutorial rectangle. I'll store it as an SVG. I click on Save. It's automatically saved, but if you want to make sure, click on Export. Here you can see I've got it already exported, but I'll replace it. Now if I open a folder, go to my desktop, here it is. I can simply drag and drop it into Inkscape. You might see this warning message, or it's more a message that allows you to adjust the way it is imported. For beginners, just confirm via OK, and now we have two rectangles, so we've imported it successfully. As I've said, on the file it's the same for import and export as here on the right hand side, these two icons. Let us create our first project. What I want you to do is to create a rectangle. It has to be perfect square with width and height of 50. I use millimeters as values. Keep the edges sharp, and you want to create multiple of these. You can create them with the rectangle tool or simply copy and paste. Ctrl C, Ctrl V. And we have the snapping enabled. This should help you to position them just like this. I'll position them to the left hand side of my document. And I copy these two once more, copy paste. Now we have 4. Now select them all, make them as big as your document. And then use the swatches down below, just like this, to create a simple color scale. Afterwards, I want you to export it. Use your selection, export it maybe to your desktop, but definitely export it where you can find it. Call it whatever you want, make sure it's an SVG. And then I want you to import it. You can just drag and drop it or go to File, Import, access your desktop and double click on what you've exported. And now you should have 2 of these. Pause this video until you've done this project and then come back for the next one. Let me show you something else that we can do with rectangles. Let me give it maybe this red color right here. I'll just width and height to 200 times 200. Now I use the selection tool and I can left click on it yet again, and you can see how these icons on top, left, right, they change. So you can always click 2 times on elements, and when you've clicked the second time on it, you can use the icons to rotate your object, in this case the rectangle, and it will be rotated around this center plus sign. You can move that around to readjust the fixed point for your rotation. It's sometimes a little bit hard to get it, but it changes its color to green, and then you know you have it, and then you can rotate it. If you want to reposition this plus sign into the center of the object, we need to go back to our snapping, the advanced mode. And you have to have the midpoint right here, and also the object rotation sensor checked under other points. It only works when you have both of them active at the same time. So make sure that this is the case, and obviously other points need to be checked as well, as it's the category of it. And now it's back in center position. Let us create yet another rectangle. I hold Control. We have a square. I click on it 2 times so that we can rotate it. And now I hold Control while I rotate. And this makes the rotation snap into certain degrees. For example, 90 degrees right here. If I want to create multiple of these, I can copy paste, Ctrl C, Ctrl V. But there's also another short key which is called Ctrl D. This is going to create a copy in the very exact same position. So if I press it, we now have 2 stacked on top of one another. I'll do it again, Ctrl D, and once more. Now we have 4. Let me make it 5. If I give them a different fill, you can see it's different rectangles rotated 90 degrees. You can also rotate the entire group. So select it all, click on it again, and hold Control to maybe make it 90 degrees rotated as a group. As your next project, I want you to do exactly that. Create a rectangle, hold Ctrl-Y-Do to have a square. but we want to make it 60 times 60 specifically. You want to use a blue color selection. Click on it with the selection tool until you can rotate it. Hold Ctrl when you do to have a 90-degree rotation. Then use Ctrl D to create copies. You want to have 5 in total, and then use the blue color swatches down here to create this element. And then rotate it, but not 90 degrees. Instead, I want you to go to 30 degrees, which should be 2 increments while you hold Ctrl. Pause this video, recreate it, and then come back for the next lesson. Let us move on. And one thing that you're going to use a lot is zooming. There is a specific zoom tool right here. You can draw something to zoom in. You can use plus minus here. They're predefined aspect ratios, 1:1, 1:2, something like this. But for the most part, I don't use this tool. Instead, I use a short key and my mouse wheel. And I don't even have to have the zoom to active. This is why I always use it instead of switching to the zoom tool. I simply hold Ctrl and you can see that in the bottom line. When I click Ctrl, it's going to be visible right here. And then I use the mouse wheel to zoom in and out. It's that simple. This is what I like to use. Maybe you're different and you want to use the tool, totally fine. But from my experience, doing it like this is the easiest and quickest. Let me show you 2 more functions and then we'll create another project. I want to have a rectangle 50 times 60. I'll start with this color. Then I'll press Ctrl D to have it copied. Snapping is still enabled, so I can place it right here next to the first one. I select them both, Ctrl D, and now I have 4. Let me rotate this while holding Ctrl. You can see here is a bounding box around each rectangle. So we know they are not grouped, but we have a chance right here in the object to group it, Ctrl G, or ungroup it, Shift Ctrl G. So select both, Ctrl G, now they're grouped. And I don't have to select both anymore to drag around both, because they're now inside of a group. Shift Ctrl G and they're ungrouped. And now I can drag them around individually. But this is not just helpful for dragging, it's also helpful for aligning and distributing objects on your canvas. Under Object, the last function, Align and Distribute. You can also press Shift Ctrl A. Explains it a little bit better. I don't want to go over all of the details. For now, we want to be on a line. Then I group these 2. So select them, then Ctrl G. When I have Shift Ctrl G active and they're not grouped, you can see what happens if I want to align them. Let me align them according or relative to the page. And I put them in center, horizontal and vertical. They both overlap now. But if I put them together, select them both, Ctrl G, and now I align them relative to page to center, we have a totally different result. So the group is now being aligned. If I do that here as well, Ctrl G, I align them, we have this result. Let me press Shift Ctrl G, I ungroup it. I use the snapping right here, then I select all, I align it. We have a totally different result. So this is why we need grouping the most part. It's for aligning and distributing stuff. Let us go to fill and stroke yet again. You've seen that already, but I haven't yet talked about the blending modes. They're right here, and I'm pretty sure that you've seen them in Photoshop, in GIMP. And when I give these rectangles different colors, it becomes a little bit more obvious. Let me just use these color swatches right here. And there you go. The blending modes, they create a totally different color where these rectangles are overlapping one another. And this helps us creating nice effects. Let us bring it all together in a new project. Try to recreate this. We'll start with a simple rectangle. When I have a specific size, so we'll go to width 100 and height 80. This is where we want to start. Press Ctrl D to copy it. Place them just like this. Group them, pressing Ctrl G. Then Ctrl D to copy, rotate it while holding Ctrl, select both, then go to Object, Align and Distribute, align it relative to page, horizontal and vertical. Now we have a plus sign. I'll close this, then go to Fill and Stroke, change the blending mode to Hue, select it, Shift Ctrl G to ungroup, and now give it these different color swatches. In the end, select it all, Ctrl G to group it, pause the video, try to recreate it, and then come back for the next chapter. Let us talk about a couple of more functions under Fill and Stroke. We'll create a rectangle once again. Just resize it by hand and then go to width 140 and height 50. Drag this circle down. Make it to the max until it doesn't go any further anymore. Should have rounded corners now. I press Ctrl D. Now I have two. I'll make this one black. It's on top of the blue one. So if I reposition this, the blue one isn't visible anymore, but it's beneath the black one. I go to Object, Fill and Stroke. And now let us talk about blur and opacity. Opacity, you can see that it makes it transparent until you can't see it anymore. Blur is interesting for our next project. Let me go up here and you can see it feathers out, so it blurs the object. But I want to have it beneath the blue one, so go to the top function right here. When my selection tool is active, I can adjust the stacking order. Lower would put it one level below, and to bottom would it to the lowest level. In this case, this is the same as we only have two objects. So let me use to bottom. And now if I blur it, you can see the black one is still active and it gets blurred while it is behind the blue one. This is what we want. And now I use the arrow keys downwards and to the right. And we've created a drop shadow for our blue element. This is usually how you do it. You blur out the element, make it black obviously, and then put it to the bottom, reposition it slightly. You can also adjust the blur using the nodes tool, which is the second tool on the left hand side in the toolbar. A couple of these functions are the regular functions of the rectangle, so resizing and making rounded corners. But these two circles right here are for the blur. So you can specifically adjust horizontal and vertical blur now in Inkscape 1.3. We'll just keep it like it was by default. I just wanted to show you this. so that we've got it covered. Now we'll use the text tool right here. I'll go further into detail with the tool in the future in another chapter. For now, just right button, press Ctrl A to select it all. Then use this drop down to use a different font. We'll use Arial, everyone has that installed. Next drop down is for the style, I want to have it bold. Then it's for the size, let me make it 100. The unit is set to points. And you can see 100 was too big. Let me use the text tool again. I'll press Ctrl A, everything is selected. And then I go to 80. 80 should be good. I'll put it in center of my button. And I can also change the fill right here. For example, make it white. I'll select it all, Ctrl G, and we've got this button created. Let us now create a new project. We're going to exactly do something like this. So we'll create a button. What I want you to do, use the rectangle tool. I'll make it black. We want to have 150 times 50. Make it rounded corners. Make it red. Then Ctrl D to copy. Make the copy black. Put the copy to the bottom so that you can see the red. And the black one is the selected object, fill and stroke. Set the blur to 20%. Then select the red one with a left click and reposition it 5 steps to the top, 5 steps to the left. Use the text tool. Write in all caps "Buy now." Make it Calibri and bold. You should have that inbuilt. Make it 80 points. Put it in center of the button and then make it white. Select it all, Ctrl G, and you've created your first button. Pause the video, recreate it, and then we'll start with the next chapter. Let us talk about the next shape. It's a simple circle or an ellipse. The tool is called Ellipse Arc Tool. Left click on it and you can see 2 values are X, R, Y. The units, and let me make it black for now. If I just left click drag, we have an ellipse and you can select them just like we did with rectangles. Let me create a new one, and this time I'll hold Ctrl, and this makes it snap yet again into increments, and at 45 degrees we have a perfect circle. You can also hold Shift, which readjusts the fixed point, and if I release it you can see Rx and Ry have the same value. So this means that the circle is perfect. Here the Rx value is way higher in this ellipse, and if I make it 2020 we have a perfect circle. I've got it set to millimeters. Doesn't really matter in this case, but you could set it to pixels, for example, right here. You can give it different fill colors and you can rotate it. With a perfect circle you don't see the rotation. But if you make it an ellipse, I click on it again and then rotate it, you can see it. Let us talk about the 3 points that you can see when you've got this ellipse tool, the circle tool active. This one's for the Rx value, so the radius in X dimension. Here's the Ry value. And here's also a little circle, just like with the rectangle, but it doesn't make your corners round as the circle doesn't have corners. Instead, you can create these Pac-Mans, so you can get rid of segments in your circle. Circle by default is 0 to 360 degrees. So if I go to 90 degree, 270, you can see these are top, left, bottom, and right position. Keep in mind the last style is stored, so if you keep it like this and you drag a new ellipse, it will have 90 degrees as well. If you ever get lost, just click here and you have the entire 360 degrees back. One more thing to add. The cursor position makes a difference. Right now we are here, so we are outside, and if I move it inwards, you can see that this circle now gets closed. So this is the second mode right here. Third mode, you can only see it when a stroke is applied. So let me add a stroke. I'll hold Shift and left click. Right now it's dashed, but you can see the difference. So it closes the stroke or it leaves it open. And if I go to my stroke styles, under fill and stroke, and I turn the dash to a straight line, let me make it 3 millimeters as a width. So one is an open, the other one a closed stroke. I'll get back to a filled circle. Let's create a project, a simple emoji. I'll hold Ctrl 45 degrees so that we have a perfect circle. Let me change it to 75-75. I've got it set to millimeters. In units, I'll keep 0 and 0 for start and end. Let me use a yellow color. Maybe I pick this one. And I'll keep the stroke. It was 3 millimeters in width. Let me create an ellipse. If you click on the X, it gets rid of the fill, but I want to get rid of the stroke, so I hold Shift, left click, and then I release Shift, click on black. This is our left eye. I press Ctrl D to copy. Here's our right eye. By the way, I hold Shift when I reposition that to the right. This way it snaps in the horizontal dimension. Select them both, Ctrl G to group. Then I'll select all, Object, Align and Distribute. I've got it relative to page, and I use the center alignment, but only in one dimension. So only here for the vertical axis, the horizontal I keep it, and then I move it down a little bit while holding Shift. Let us create the mouth, maybe something like this. And again, I'll align it relative to page. It's in center now, but I have to reposition that slightly using the arrow keys down and up. Let's add a tongue. Now that's too intense. I'll pick this red right here, put it on top of your mouth, and I have to reposition that a little bit. I'll Control zoom in. When you resize it and you hold Shift, you only have to resize one side and the other side will automatically be adjusted. So if I hold Shift and drag it towards the left, the other side automatically moves to the right, and we've got the same dimensions. In the end, select it all, Ctrl G to group, and you've created your first emoji. As always, pause the video, recreate it, come back for the next chapter afterwards. Let us talk about pie charts, because we can use this ellipse, arc, circle tool to create them. Let me make it 70 times 70. We've got a perfect circle. And I'll start with this red color. Then I press Ctrl D and give it this color. Ctrl D, yellow, Ctrl D, green, and Ctrl D yet again. So I've got many differently colored circles on top of one another. Let me go to the top one. I use this circle tool and now can drag this, and you can see this already resembles a pie chart. What I have to do is I have to select these circles one by one with the select tool. I can press S for that, which is the short key. And then I have to activate the circle tool. E is the short key. And then I can drag these circles just like this. And now we have a pie chart. This is obviously drawn by hand, but if you know the exact values that you need, you can use right here the numerical values for start and end. Let's say you know this is 60. Obviously you have to convert it, so a circle has 360 degrees, so 60 would be a 6 of 100%. There's a different way to do it. You can also go to Extensions, Render, and use the NiceCharts right here. It's inbuilt by default in Inkscape. It will give you this new menu, and if you check the live preview, you can see the default. Under drop down, I've got pie chart selected, and under data direct input, you can type in your data right here. But it's a good idea to turn the live preview off while you do it, because it tries to update itself all the time and it's a little bit buggy here and there. So turn it off. And for example, we make our first value YouTube, set it to 20, and then you have to separate the next value with a comma, just like the fruits here. I'll make it Twitter 50 and then Instagram 30, so that we have 100 in total. Now I check the live preview again. And you can see we have YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter. And Twitter is exactly 50% of the circle. If I make it 40, it updates itself automatically. This is what I meant by unchecking the live preview while you update your stuff or input the data. Under labels, you can change the font and even the font size, but again, uncheck the live preview first. I'll make it 20, check it again, and now these labels are way bigger. Under charts, you can adjust the style of the circle, the pie chart itself. I don't want to go over all of the details for beginners, that's a little bit too much. And there aren't really any changes in Inkscape 1.3, so check out my playlist. I've made a video about this in the earlier version where I've gone over all of the details of this NiceCharts menu. Let's check values, and you can see it simply adds the numerical values right here to our labels. When you want to keep it, don't forget to click on Apply right here, then close the menu. It's individual elements for now. Then we press Ctrl Z, and now I press Ctrl A to have it all selected, then Ctrl G to group it. So if you know your values, it may be a good idea to use this menu, but for next project, we'll do it by hand. Create a circle, 60 times 60. It's set to millimeters. We want to start with this red color right here. Then Ctrl D, change the colors, Ctrl D again, and so forth until you've arrived at this greenish color. So we have 5 in total. And then set these values for the endpoint. For green, we want to have 30. So this would be a 12 of the total data value. For yellow, put it to 65. Next color, 155. Red, I want you to set it to 270. And finally select it all, Ctrl G to group it, and you've created your first pie chart. If you want to have further practice, try to recreate it using the extensions and the render NiceCharts, and when you're done, come back for the next chapter. Let us now talk about the next tool. We can use it to create polygons. It's the star polygon tool right here. By default, it's set to star and the icon looks like it. I've got 3 corners currently. Let me make it 5 and you can see the star. We want to use the tool next to it. So this is the polygon tool, set to 5 corners. You can change the fill color just like with rectangle circles. Let me make it 7 and increase it while it's active. You can see more corners are added, and 3 is the lowest, which gives you a triangle. Let me make it 6 so that we have a hexagon. We're going to work with it a little bit. I'll stay at 6. You can rotate this, so click on it 2 times, change the cursor. You can hold Ctrl while you rotate to make it snap to increments. You can hold Ctrl while you create it, and this is going to make it snap in position. So if you want to have some of these lines perfectly aligned, hold Ctrl while you drag it. You can adjust the roundness right here, and it also goes into the negative so that you have a negative roundness, which is going to create these shapes. You can randomize it right here, so it is going to reposition all of these corners. And this also works in a negative space. This is still a hexagon, so we still have 6 corners. If you count them all, it's 6. And there's also this little icon right here. You can drag it to readjust the position. Truth be told, I never used this. So far at least, I haven't used it. So I want to set this to 0 and round it as well. You can also click on this icon to the right and it's going to snap to the default. But as I've said, I want to have a hexagon, so I make it 6. But first let me import an image. You can just drag and drop it onto your canvas. This menu will pop up. Just confirm we are okay. Depending on the size of your image, it's going to take a while, but here it is now. And you can size that down holding Ctrl, just like with rectangles. This is going to keep the aspect ratio. Now I'll create my hexagon. 6 corners. Top left tool, and I hold Ctrl while I drag it. I'll place my image behind it. Let me size the hexagon up. I'll hold Ctrl and Shift while I do. I'll place it on top of the bike. Now I'll select both, and then I can right click and set clip. And this is going to put the image into your shape. So it's now a hexagon shaped image. And you can treat this like any object, so rotate it for example. Make it bigger, move it around. You can also release the clip if you're not happy and reposition it. What I like to do is I'll select the shape I want to clip it to. Go to fill and stroke and go down with the opacity. Now I position the image. This position should be good. I'll reselect the shape, opacity to 100, select it all, right click and set a clip. Now I want you to create something similar. For our next project, we'll create a simple honeycomb design and then we'll clip a couple of images to it. We'll start with one hexagon, then press Ctrl D to copy it. It should snap to your object. If it isn't, open your snapping, enable it. And now you can see this snaps perfectly. I press Ctrl D once again. And I create more of them. Let me put maybe another one here. And I close this shape. And now I want to clip an image to each. So I press Ctrl D to copy this one. Then I have to put it to the bottom. So it has to be below the shape you want to clip it to. Then I hold Shift and click on the shape. So I left click on the image, hold Shift, left click on the shape, both are selected, right click, set a clip, and it's connected now. I'll show this again. I'll put the image below the shape. Maybe I use another one, so let me press Ctrl D and I put the copy here. Image is selected with a left click, hold Shift, left click on the shape. Both are selected, right click, set clip, and you're good. As I've said before, the image has to be below the shape, so you may have to use the top function right here. And I want you to pick different images, create this 6x6 design. If you don't know where to find images, go to a page called Unsplash. You can use these images for free and even commercially. It's a free website for such stock photos. And here, for example, is the image of the motorbike. Just download it here, then drag and drop it onto your canvas in Inkscape, and try to recreate this honeycomb design. Alright, let us move on. At first, we'll create a polygon yet again using 6 corners. Hold Ctrl when you drag it. You see this little icon right here and you can drag it and readjust it. It's only available when you have polygon tool active, so now it's gone. And here it is again. But you can't make the corners round with it, like we could with the rectangle tool. You need to use a different tool for that, which is called the Nodes tool. It's the second on the left. And then you will find in the top menu the LPE corners. If you click on it, we now have these circles and we can readjust the roundness of these corners just like this. So whenever you have objects that don't have this option to round corners by default, you can use LPE corners. Let us use it on something that we can actually use from a design perspective. Yet again, I create a polygon. That's a hexagon. I'll control when I drag it. Activate the Nodes tool, click on LP corners. And now drag the top one to the max. And the one on the sides right here to the max. This one needs to go to the bottom. And now we have a shield design. So this is how easy you can turn a polygon into a shield using this function. You may want to pause the video and recreate this to get a feel for it. And then we'll start with the next project. This time I want you to set the corners to 3 so that we have a triangle. Hold Ctrl when you drag it. You can see right here, 3 corners makes a triangle. Hold Ctrl when you size it down. Use LP corners and then by hand just make the corners round. Exact value doesn't matter that much, it's just a project to try this function. You can copy this, pressing Ctrl D, and the copies, they will have rounded corners by default. Let me switch to a blue color selection. And maybe we'll start with this color right here. Let me delete this one. I select the first one, Ctrl D, I give it a lighter blue, and now I hold Ctrl and Shift when I size it down, and then I drag it to the bottom line, just like this. I do it again, Ctrl D, recolor, hold Shift and Ctrl when you resize, and you may want to turn off the snapping temporarily. It gives you more freedom to resize it, but when you want to drag it down so that it is in line, make sure that the snapping is enabled again, and then drag it downwards like this. So we have 3 on top of one another. Select them all, Ctrl D to copy, and hold Ctrl when I drag it to the right. And now drag it to the left again until the small ones are touching, just like this. Select it all. Go to Object, Fill and Stroke, up here. And change the blending mode to Screen. So now you can see the overlaps, and this is what we want. We want this overlapping triangle logo design with rounded corners. Pause the video and try to recreate it, and then come back for the next chapter. Next up, I'm going to show the Start tool. That's in the same position where we found the Polygon tool, but this time it's the second mode right here on the top left. Got it set to 3 corners, but if I edit, we'll get this typical star shape design. We make it 5. We have a spoke ratio. You can see what that does. And you can also adjust it by dragging these little circles right here. So left click on it, then drag, and it adjusts the spoke ratio manually. Can adjust the outside like so. Let me get back to 0.5. This adjusts the angle once again, but not the position. We adjust the position right here. Yet again, we have this star shape. Let me set it back to 0.5. With all tools, if I delete this, select another one, then get back to the star tool, the last style is saved. So here it still is. You also have the option to jump back to the defaults by clicking on this icon at the top right. And when you hold Shift, you are adjusting the roundness, which is the second value in the top right here. This just makes the spikes round. You can randomize it to create very weird shapes. Let's jump back to the default. And I'll show you why these styles are saved. This goes for all tools. We'll just go to Edit Preferences, and under the drop-down tools, we will find the entire toolbox on the left. In our case, we need to go to Shapes, and there is right here, Star Polygon tool. And here it's selected last used style. We can also set it to a specific style right here, or take from selection. Now if I delete it, create a new one, you can see it's yellow because this is what I've set it up in the preferences, and this goes for all tools. Just as an explanation, let me jump back to Edit Preferences, and I reset it to last used style. So this is for every tool by default active. I want to go back. And now, if I make it red, this last style is saved. When you hold Control, the spikes, they snap into increments. So left click, drag, hold Control, and you've got it perfectly aligned, just like so. Let us create a project together first, and then I give you one. I create a rectangle, Ctrl D to copy, snapping is enabled. This one I rotated holding Control, so I need to click on it 2 times and hold Control while I rotate it. Resize it a little bit so that it's as big as the other 2 together. I'll make it blue, white, and red. We can't see the white on this background, so I select it, hold Shift, click on black to have a stroke, but it's a little bit too thick, so select it all, Object, Filler and Stroke, go to Stroke Style, and go down here with the width. Let me set it to millimeters, and I'll make it 3. That's too much, I'll make it 1. Close it, and now we'll use our Polygon Star tool. 5 corners. I hold Control when I drag it. I want to have the spike on top like this. I want to have it white. And when I set it down, I hold Control and Shift. Let me turn off the snapping temporarily. Control and Shift while sizing down. Hold Shift and click on the X at the bottom left to get rid of the stroke. And I want to change the spoke ratio. Let me select it and move it upwards a little bit. I'll activate the Star tool and I go down to maybe 0.4. That's a better value. And now we have this Texas flag. I select it, Ctrl G to group. Now it's up to you to create the American flag. It doesn't have to be perfect. So I know there is a specific number of stars. We're just going to create an idealized version of it. Create a rectangle first, make it red, Ctrl D, and I have to have the snapping enabled again. Copy it again, then make it white. And let me check, I believe that we need 7 red ones. And it needs to start and end with red. So we need only 6 white ones in between. Let me select it all and I'll make it a little bit wider to right and left, like this. And I'll drag it a little bit upwards. Let's create another rectangle. And this should be blue. And now let us create the stars. Hold Control when you drag one. It needs to be white. We use a spoke ratio of 0.4 and I have to size it down. I'll press Ctrl D to copy. I'll hold Control when I drag it to the right. And I have to repeat this a couple of times. Let me size it down holding Control. We can work with that. Ctrl D, create the next row. Ctrl D for both rows. One more. We don't need the last row right here. So let me select it properly and I'll delete it. Well, let me use a darker blue. That looks better. Select it all, Ctrl G to group it. As always with these projects, it's about learning to use the tools. It's not about perfection. Try to recreate it, so pause the video, do it yourself, and then come back for the next chapter. Let us move on with our next tool. In the toolbox on the left, it's the 3D box tool, and it does what the name suggests. So we can create boxes in 3 dimensions. Just left click drag, and you have your 3 angles indicated by the 3 different colors. This icon up here, it fixates the angle, and if you click on it, it releases it. Let me delete what we've got, and I only have 1 dimension free, the other one's fixated. I left click drag, and only the blue one is free, so if I use plus minus, you can see this angle changes, and the other ones, they stay. You can left click drag here to make the boxes longer in all 3 different areas. Now let us release the second one. This is the red angle. If you misclick, like I did right here, just press Ctrl Z and then left click on the box that you've had prior, and it's going to give you the angles back. You can see I can readjust the red one now as well. And here is the yellow one. Obviously for angles, it goes from 0 to 360. And let me show you this by simply creating a new project. Left click drag to have this basic 3D box active on your canvas. You can see it release all of your angles by clicking on the icon. Make the X angle 160, Y angle 260, and here the Z angle. If I go to 360, it stops, so I can't go further than that. If I want to go further, I'll have to go in the other direction. So 1 degree would be below 360, and then 20, so forth, it goes clockwise. Make this last angle 30 degrees, and when you've got that, use your general selection tool, click on it, hold Ctrl and rotate it until you've got this angle. If you want to give it a different fill color, you have to ungroup it first. You can press Shift Ctrl G for that. And now you can select each side one by one. use these color swatches down here. Recreate this and then come back for the next chapter. Next up, I want to reintroduce a topic. It's the set clip. I've already done that. Let me use the type tool. I'll make a text called clipping. I'll set it up holding Control. I'll make it black for now. We can clip objects to text as well. So let me just create a rectangle. I'll make it red. And if I select both now, right click, set clip, the object is now clipped to the text. And if I select the object, rectangle, put it to bottom, select both, right click, set clip, now the text is clipped to the object. So this is why it has changed its color. You can, for example, do this. Select it both. Once again, right click, set clip, and it changes its color. Why would you want to do this when you can change the fill down below with the swatches? Well, we can use the same principle and clip images and even complex designs with multiple colors, gradients, whatever, to our text. Let me show you this based on an image. I import it. I just drag and drop it onto my canvas, confirm. Then afterwards I size it a little bit down. I make sure that the image is below the text and the text is on top. Then select both, right click, set clip. And now the image is clipped to our text, just like the rectangle before. So this is a typical image in text effect that you can create here. Let us create a project. Based on this, I want you to go to an image site where you can download an image, for example, Unsplash. It's free to use. Create some text, in this case city would be fine. I use Arial, that's inbuilt, so you should have it too. And I want to have a bold style. Let me check. I'll try bold. I think that's fine, and I size it up to 150. Let me release the clip from the other one. We don't need our clipping text. I'll delete it. I'll put the city right here. Our text is on top of the image. I select both, right click, set clip. So you can also see that the original color of the text doesn't really matter for this effect. Pause the video, try to recreate something else, and then we'll start with the next chapter. Let me show you in this chapter how we can use the same principle and apply it to create a different outcome. For example, we've got this portrait shot and I want to cut out the face so that we can't see it anymore. Let me create an ellipse. I'll make this circle closed. Let me reposition that slightly. Now I activate the rectangle tool and I give it this turquoise color. I make it as big as my image. Put it one level below so you can see the turquoise, the red one, and the image is below. Now I click on the turquoise element, the rectangle, hold shift, and I click on the ellipse. I've got both selected now. And now I go to path and difference. Don't worry too much about this menu. These are binary options. We'll go over them in a future chapter. Just use difference now, and it's going to cut the ellipse from our rectangle. Make sure this is on top of your image, select both, and then right click and set a clip. And now you can see that the face is missing, and if I create a rectangle, put it below, this is now a cutout. When might this be helpful? Well, let me show you an example. I'll just import a new image. I size it down holding Control and Shift. And now I want to get rid of the license plate here of this car. I just use the rectangle tool, drag a rectangle like this. Let me change the color to green. I believe I've made both rectangles now green. So let me give the small one maybe a bluish color. Now I put the image to the bottom and I can see both of my rectangles, the green one and the blue one. I hold Shift to select them both at the same time. Path, difference, then select what you've got and the image below. Set a clip. And now the license plate is gone. It's cut out from the image thanks to this clipping mechanism. Try to recreate this project. Once again, you can go to Unsplash, type in car, and you will find, for example, this one. I've used it right here by Eric McLean. But there are other ones, maybe this. Just pick one, download it, and try to recreate this effect so that you get used to using Inkscape and then come back for the next chapter. Let us move on with a shorter chapter this time. It's a helpful tool, but it's quickly explained. I've got 3 different colored rectangles. I create an ellipse. And now I want to add this color of the rectangle to the ellipse. In this case, I know my color swatches, they are marked, highlighted, so I could use them. But there's a different tool. It's the eyedropper or dropper tool. If you hover now over the rectangles, you can see that the little swatch over the icon is going to change. And if you left click, the ellipse is going to get the color. This is because the ellipse is highlighted. So if I, for example, select the top rectangle, press D or the eyedropper tool, and then left click on the other shapes, you can see the color of this rectangle changes. Let's go to Object, Fill and Stroke. Then you can see the hex code right here. So it's RGB and the alpha channel. If I use the eyedropper tool, this also changes. And I could even select the white background, which is all zeros for RGBA. But what if you just do it like this without having anything selected? Well, you can't see the color under Fill and Stroke, but there's a bottom menu or a bottom line right here. And there you can see the hex code. So if I hover over the green one, it changes. The mustard yellow and the red one on the hex code is indicated right here. What you should take away from this tool is the short key D, on that you can change colors of objects that are selected with a left click using it. No specific project for this one, it's just a helpful tool. Let us instead move on to the next tool, which is the spiral tool right here. Left click drag, you've got your spiral. Left click drag hold and then rotate it a bit. You can see you can readjust the start point or the end point depending on the perspective. Let me select this one. We can size it up, holding Control Shift, transforming it using the selection tool. And if we reactivate the spiral tool, we can still adjust it. Turns, it adds more lines or subtracts them. Divergence, it changes the position from start to finish, so it makes it more dense towards one side. When you get lost, just click on the last icon up here, you'll get the default back. In a radius, it readjusts the center point right here. So turns for the outside, in a radius for the inner side. And here we can jump back to the default. More things to add here. Number one is we can flip this. So right now the spiral ends on the right hand side. But what if we want to have it end on the left hand side? You can obviously rotate it, but this would also bring it to the bottom and not the top. But if you've got the select to active, you will find right here next to rotation the flipping options. Let's just flip it horizontally, and now this is exactly what we want. You can, with a left click, bring it back towards the default orientation. As I've said, you can size it up, transform it using this tool. Let's go to Object, Fill and Stroke. Spiral color is actually created via a stroke, so we can adjust the stroke style, for example width, add a round cap, And under stroke paint, we can adjust the color, make it for example red. Keep in mind you can also add a fill. So if I just left click on a color swatch, this is added as a fill. It creates weird results. For the most part, you don't want to have that. So when you want to readjust it using the swatches, hold shift and then left click to have the stroke color adjusted. Now let us create a project using the spiral tool. I'll start with the default, create something like this. Change the turns to 8. The divergence, you want to have 0.7. An inner radius, keep that in mind, it goes from 0 to 1, so 1 is the max. We want to have 0.2 for project. Make sure it's selected. We'll flip it. Then we go to Object, Fill and Stroke. Stroke, maybe I'll add a red color, so hold Shift, left click on red. Adjust the width to 5. It's set to millimeters. And for dashes, use this one. So the first option under the straight line. Try to recreate this and then come back for the next chapter. Next up is a bigger topic, so I'm only going to give you an introduction. It's about the Bezier tool. It's also called pen tool. It might be a little bit intimidating, but we'll go over the basics and it's going to be quite simple. First up, ignore the top menu. There are different modes and a drop down for shape, scale. We want to use the regular Bezier path. And this is also what you need to use for the most part. I've made tutorials about this too. If you want to learn more, just check out my playlist. The basics, just left click and you create nodes. They are also called anchor points in other software. You can connect the last one, but you have to hit it right. You can see right here, cursor changes a little bit. Then I know I'm at the start and then I left click and it's a closed shape. I want to get rid of the fill, so I click on the X. Bottom left, then I hold shift, click on black. So now we have a black stroke, no fill. Under object, fill and stroke, you can now treat this just like a rectangle or an ellipse. For example, make the stroke a little bit thicker, or you can add a fill right here. Maybe I'll make it red, just as an example. We want to have no fill and a black stroke. Let me delete this. And I'll start over again with the Bezier tool. This time I click and then I drag. And this is what gives us curves. And if I left click again, we have straight lines. Once again, find the start point, left click and it's closed. Let me create another shape. And now I'll use the nodes tool right here. And I can hover over these lines and then left click drag. When the cursor has changed, and there's also a way to create curves, and I think this is way better than using left click drag with the Bezier tool. You can select these nodes with the left click and then you have the handles to adjust the angle. So my approach is to usually use the Bezier tool for the outline and I keep it to straight lines, and then I use the nodes tool and create the curves. One more thing, you can hold control and you can see the line it snaps. So if you want to have straight lines in a certain angle, make sure that you hold control. Now that we've talked about the basics, let us use them on a project. We will recreate the Batman logo, or somewhat. I'm going to draw it by hand, so it's not going to be perfect. We will start right here with a left click, then hold control, go to the left, have a straight horizontal line, left click, hold control, go upwards to maybe, this should be 30 degrees, then go down. Once again I hold control, left click, now I release control, and I go to maybe this spot right here. If you want to close it and you haven't found the right position, you can press Ctrl Z, go back, and maybe it's a good idea to use a guide. You can drag them out of your rulers right here. If you can't see them, just press Ctrl R, but by default they should be active. I'll leave it right here. Press Ctrl Z. Now I go to my guides and I close it. Let me get rid of the guide, left click, drag towards the rulers. Now I use the nodes tool and I hover over these lines and left click, drag to create the curves. A little bit of guesswork, as I've said, I created manually, so no template here or anything. And if you want to readjust the nodes, left click on them and drag them around like this. Readjust the angle of your curves using the handles. I think that's okay for a hand-drawn shape. Let me give it a black fill. So I simply click on a black color swatch and I get rid of the stroke. So hold Shift and click on the X. This is selected, I press Ctrl D and now I'll flip it up here. I reconnect them, select them both and then go to Path and use Union. This is going to make the two shapes one. Let me size it down a little bit, holding Shift and Ctrl. And I also transform it a little bit so that it's not that thick. So just release all short keys and drag it from right to left. Now let us create an ellipse. I'll make it yellow and I'll put it to the bottom right here. I'll resize it slightly and I'll make sure that our black element is in center. The snapping helps. And I give it a black stroke, holding Shift, clicking on a black color swatch. Select it all, Ctrl G, and this is how you can somewhat create this Batman logo. Try to recreate it, get yourself familiar with the Bezier tool, and then come back for the next chapter. Let us move on with a different chapter. I've put arrows and nodes together, even though it's not necessarily connected, but the nodes tool isn't that complex when it comes to beginners. There are a lot of functions, but most of them you don't need them in the beginning, so I would advise you to just ignore them. There are just a couple that you will need in 99% of the cases, and the rest you can find specific tutorials about that in my playlist, and nothing has changed that much compared to earlier Inkscape versions. Let me create a rectangle, and you can see at the bottom line it is a rectangle. And if I now use the nodes tool, I have my 3 points for adjusting it, for example, rounded corners, and the X in center to drag it around. When you want to add a new node, right here, first function, insert, new node, it doesn't work because we're working on a rectangle, so adding a curve, for example, doesn't work. Adding or deleting nodes doesn't work. We have to work on a path. To turn this rectangle into a path, we need to go to Path and then Object to Path. And then watch what happens. It's still selected and the bottom line says Path for nodes. Earlier it said rectangle, therefore we know we have converted it now to a path. And if we use the nodes tool now and we click on one of these nodes, we can actually transform this object and drag just a single corner, anchor point, node, whatever you want to call it, around. And now we can also add new nodes. It stores the last position, so if I click on plus, we have it right here now. I can drag this up. I go to the top and I can also double click, which is just kind of like a short key or a short click to creating a new node. This function, delete nodes, might also be interesting to you. I click on it and a node is gone and a curve is created between the two neighboring nodes. You can also use this function right here to make it smooth. The node is then kept and you have a curve. Let me hit it correctly. Now I can move it around and adjust the angle right here. We can also straighten lines, so I select the two top nodes and now I straighten the line and the curve is gone. You can also straighten these two. It's going to keep the curve on the right. Let me add a curve at the top. You can see this also works. And we have our Add Corners LPE. I've already shown you this in an earlier chapter. It gives you these circles and you can adjust curves at the corners. And these are the basics that you need in 99% of the cases, and the rest is more for intermediate to advanced illustrators. So I don't want to include that into a beginner video. As I've said, if you're interested in learning more, just check out my playlist. Go through the videos one by one and you will learn all of these functions along the way. Let me now create an arrow. I use the path tool or pen tool. Hold Shift, click on a red color swatch. This line is now red. I select it, Object, Fill and Stroke. I go to Stroke Style, I increase the width, and now you can see the markers drop down right here. It's 3 drop downs. It's for start, finish, and middle. In this case, we only have a start and a finish as our line only has 2 nodes or 2 points. You can pick one here, adjust its size in X and Y. By default, it's connected, so you can unlink it right here and now only adjust one dimension. There's a lot of freedom to adjust these default arrows or default markers. You can flip it around right here. Let us keep this orientation. We keep the offset to 0. It just means that it starts at the endpoint that we've defined with the pen tool. I'll add a start marker, maybe this. And as I've said, there's a middle, but we don't have a middle node, therefore this is not going to be shown. Let us fix this using the nodes tool. So what we need to activate the nodes tool. We can drag this line, make it curved. Let me click on the X to get rid of the fill. And now I double click. This is going to add a node. You can now see that it's highlighted. And I add a middle marker. Orientation is wrong, so flip it. And this is basically the way to create arrows in Inkscape. Let me hold Shift, click on a black color swatch. You can see these markers are also affected by the color. When you work with arrows, it's a good idea to create a basic one and then work with copies so that they all have the same design. So Ctrl D and then use the flipping functions right here. Let us now create our own project. Use the pen tool or path tool. Create this shape with 5 nodes. Go to Fill and Stroke. Find it under Object if it's not open. Make the width 2 in millimeters. We'll add an end marker. Just for clarification, some of these are see-through, and here you can see when you make it 4 and your width is 2, it doesn't fit anymore, and if you increase the width, the arrow is also affected. So this is a relative size. It's a good idea to keep it to 1. This means that it has the same thickness as your width. For the most part, you want to have that. I'll add a start marker. Some of them have disconnected X and Y values automatically, like this one. We want to increase the Y value to 5 so that we can see it, and it's pretty big. And in center we want to add this one, but we'll also make it filled. So pick the one on top right here. Let me close it. Afterwards we use the nodes tool. Select the bottom node, make it smooth right here. And select the top ones. Also make them smooth so that we have a nice curve. Finally, hold Shift and click on a red color swatch, and then you've created your first arrow. As always, recreate it, then come back for the next chapter. Now we have a bigger chapter, but it's big for a reason. You're going to use this a lot when you use Inkscape for graphic design. And this chapter is about gradients. We've got the gradient tool right here. And there are 4 basic modes: linear, radial, for fill, and for stroke. We'll go over all of them and how to apply them. Let us create a simple rectangle. It's black, no stroke. We activate the gradient tool. It's set to linear and also to fill. So first and third mode are active, linear and fill. I left click drag and you can see how this gradient gets applied. If you want to adjust it, it's better to use object, fill and stroke. Here we have all of the modes and options that we have in the top gradient menu anyway. You can select these nodes by left clicking on them, but it's sometimes hard to hit them. I tend to misclick here, but you can adjust the colors right here. By default, the second color has an alpha channel of 0, so it fades out. You can adjust the offset right here. Don't worry if that's too quick, we're going to do it a couple of times. Here's our alpha channel. I drag it up to 100 and now the green color is not fading out anymore. It's fully green. Here you have a drop down, ignore it for now. It's the same as here, we only have one gradient, so don't worry too much. We can flip it, which changes the colors, and repeat it. In this case, it doesn't matter, so ignore this drop down as well. I've made a specific video about this stuff in my playlist. This is more like intermediate gradient usage. What's interesting for you is the stops. We have 2 color points, you could say. They're called stops in gradients. And we can cycle through them right here. With a left click, we can use the drop down and then apply the offset, which moves this stop on the gradient line. Let me do that for the red one, which is stop 1 as well. And then there are plus and minus for adding or subtracting. But there's an easier way to do it. Here's the offset once again, and here we can cycle through the stops in our fill and stroke menu. This is why I think the menu is better to adjust gradients. And you can see here we've got linear gradient selected, and we can flip back to fill color, which is going to erase our gradient, so it's always better to press Ctrl Z. And now we've arrived at the gradient that we had adjusted prior. Let us use it on our first project. We'll use the polygon tool, make it a pentagon, so we need 5 corners. Hold Ctrl when you drag it. Keep rounded, randomized to 0. You want to have something like this. Don't worry about the size, it's about applying the gradient. Use the gradient tool or click here on linear gradient under fill. Now it's added. Here we can adjust the colors. First one I make red, second one I want to have green, but I also have to adjust the alpha channel to 100. If we want to adjust the angle, we need to activate the gradient tool, and then we can drag the stops around. Here I misclicked, I press Ctrl Z. As I've said, it's sometimes hard to left click and drag the stops, but I want you to create something like this. Got the snapping enabled by default, so it should snap to these two corners, and you can find the specific colors, the hex code for it right here under RGBA. We create it and we'll just dive in to the next function of the gradient tool and the next project. We need another rectangle. We'll apply gradients to the fill. It has to be linear. You can also hold Ctrl here to make it snap to 15-degree increments. First up, we'll increase the alpha for the second stop, make it red. The first stop will make it blue. Then we can add a third color or a third stop by simply double-clicking right here on this gradient line. So left, double-click, and you've got a new stop created. You can select it right here under Fill and Stroke, make it for example green. This also has an offset, and if I want to have it perfectly in center, it must be at 0.5. Now we know it's in center, blue is at the left, red on the right. We can flip it. This is how you can create gradients with multiple colors. Let us start with the next project. We want to create a rainbow gradient. We need a rectangle, the linear gradient for the fill. First stop, make it red, alpha 100. Second stop, alpha 100, make it also red. And now we double click on our gradient line to create new stops. And we'll increase it a little bit towards orange, then towards yellow, greenish, then fully green, then turquoise. We also need blue. Maybe one more. Let me make it two more. Now we adjust it a little bit. First up, we'll keep it. Orange is okay, the next one also, but here we have to adjust the color. Let me drag these circles towards a specific color. Don't worry too much about the offset, it's just about creating this multicolor gradient with this rainbow style. Try to recreate it, then come back for the next project. This time we'll start with a circle and we'll use the radial gradient. So second mode, it's applied to the fill. If you now left click drag, it looks a little bit different. You still have two stops, but the first stop is in center and the second stop are these two ones on the outside. In this case, black to white. We can flip it. Now it's white to black. Then we make that red and it becomes even more obvious. First stop has an alpha of 0. I increase that and I leave it black. You can flip it around again. And here you can also double click on this line to add a new stop. I'll make it green just to show you this. And the last stop is barely visible. So let me readjust the stops a little bit by dragging these points inwards. I misclicked here, Ctrl Z. But here you can see all 3 stops. So this is what a radial gradient looks like. Let us create a project with it. We want to create a typical YouTube thumbnail, make it pixels. I will make it a video size. What is it? 1920 times 1280? Or was it 1080? I use these numbers every day and I still can't remember. But just try something like this. I'll use 1920 times 1280. Let me use 1280. But I believe 1080 was actually the video size. But anyway, we'll use this size for project. Radial gradient, apply to the fill, go to center, it should snap, and then drag it somewhat like this. Increase the alpha to 100. I will make this one the first white. And now let me adjust the second stop, the outside a little bit. Up to here maybe. And this is typical white to black gradient that lots of these product videos use in their thumbnails to present, I don't know, a smartphone or something. This is basically the process that's used to create this background. Next up, we haven't yet talked about the fourth mode and the gradient tool. Start all over again using a rectangle. It's black, no stroke. I use the gradient tool. Linear gradient, and this time apply it to stroke. I left click drag. And as it doesn't have a stroke, we can't see it. But it is applied, so if I go to stroke paint, you can see it. Linear gradient is active. I'll pick a stroke color, maybe a red one first. And if I apply the gradient now, let me make that a bit bigger, 10. And now I apply the linear gradient and we can see it. It goes from red to alpha 0, so opaque. Let me increase the alpha here. I'll make it red to blue. So Inkscape also gives you the opportunity to add gradients to strokes of elements, and that doesn't just go for rectangles. You can also use a radial gradient here. That also works. If you double click on it, you've added a new stop as usual, and you can see this also added to the stroke. If I resize it, the gradient gets smaller. Another project for you to practice this. You want to start with a circle. Hold Control. Size doesn't really matter here, but the stroke needs to be around 5. I'll use millimeters. Go to stroke paint or use the gradient tool. Set it to linear and choose stroke. Drag it left to right. We'll adjust the colors and also the alpha, but only to around 50. And this creates this weird effect where it looks like we have multiple strokes. So the gradient gets painted over the fill color, which was this darker red, and then when it gets opaque, it has this different color. Try to recreate this, and then we've got yet another function to go. You can also apply gradients to text. I'll create a simple text using the text tool. You can also press T for that. I'll get rid of the stroke. It has a black fill. I'll size it down and I'll hold Control when I do. So left click drag while holding Control. We'll add a gradient linear, fill, and now left to right. I'll make it blue and red. Let us make this a new project directly, so use the same colors right here, RGBA values, copy them, make sure you are here. And then we'll apply a stroke paint using a radial gradient, and this gives us this effect. It looks complex, but it's easy to do. Let's go down with the width to maybe like 3. It's set to black and black with alpha 0. You could also adjust this right here, so it's a regular gradient. But we want to keep it to black, and this one should be black with alpha 0. Try to recreate this, and then we've got a bigger project to go, so make sure that you have a couple of minutes available so that we can do this. On the left hand side you can see a couple of colors and the hex code. These are the hex code colors, or this is the hex code for the colors that are used in the Instagram logo. You can find that if you just Google it, hex code colors, IG logo, something, it should pop up. Or you can just copy my hex codes here. We will start with a rectangle. For now, we'll make it 600 times 600. Have rounded corners of 115. Everything is set to pixels. Now we'll apply gradients, linear to fill. We'll go from bottom left to top right. We'll start with stop 1 here, and we'll give it FEDA75. The one at the end should have 4F5BD5. And then I double click a couple of times on my line and apply the other hex codes. Once we've done that, we'll adjust the offset. It needs to be at 0, 0.25, 0.5 and 0.75, and the final one at offset 1.0, so that it's equally distributed. And it looks nice. Now we'll create a circle. Hold Control when you drag it. Let me try this size. Now we'll give it a white stroke, no fill. Maybe I'll try 7 millimeters. We'll add another circle, make it a fill, no stroke. And now we need another rectangle with rounded corners. This time no fill but a stroke. And maybe the stroke was a little bit too thick. I'll try different ones, maybe, or maybe I'll keep it and I just size this down a little bit to 500. It's a good idea to turn off the snapping temporarily. Readjust this. Let me try a width of 10 or 11. That looks a little bit better. And I want to make the outer rectangle a little bit bigger. To do that, I select it, I drag it, and I hold Shift and Control at the same time. And once you're done, select it all, Ctrl G, and your Instagram logo should look somewhat like this. Recreate all the projects and then come back for the next chapter. The next chapter is a little bit shorter. The reason why is that these tools are not really beginner tools. I still wanted to introduce them, but if you're interested in the details, check my playlist for more. It's the pencil tool, and you can left click just like with the pen, the Bezier tool. But you won't see anything because it doesn't have a stroke. Hold Shift, click on black. We have a stroke now. If you can't see it, it might be because you don't have a stroke like I did here. When you have a stroke, let me make it red. You cannot just left click and left click again. You can also left click, hold, and then move the mouse to have like a wave line. And the smoothing is important. Let me press Ctrl A and I delete. And I increase this to 100. And now I do it again. Straight line and now a wave. And the wave is almost completely straightened out. If I make it bigger, you can see we still have a wave line, but it's a very idealized one. If I make the wave small, it's almost a straight line. In principle, you could say the smoothing tries to smooth out the wavy lines, and if I go down with it, it's going to keep more of these wiggles and little shakes. Let me go to 50, and this should be a good value to have a stable wave line like this. As I've said, this tool is not really for beginners. When you want to create illustrations more intermediate and advanced in Inkscape, this is a tool to check out. Once again, look at my playlist. Same goes for the next tool, which is the Calligraphy tool. It's almost the same, but has way more options where you can adjust the start, end point, the thickness, the width of this line. You can use different modes, like so. I don't want to waste too much time on these, because as a beginner, 99.9% of your projects will not involve these tools. Let us move on to a tool that will be involved in most of your projects, and that's the text tool. You can find it right here below the Calligraphy tool. Left click on your canvas when it's active. T is the short key, by the way. You can type something in, and now I have this weird effect because I've added a stroke. Let us get rid of the stroke, so hold Shift, click on the X, and the fill color here is not the stroke, it's a simple fill. So release, Shift, click on a color swatch, and you've got it recolored. If you click on your text box, left click, and then press Ctrl A, you've got all your letters selected, and you can adjust them up here. Size, style, and font. Keep in mind that some fonts don't have all styles. For example, here Carlito has 4 styles. Arial has way more. That depends on the font that you've got installed. To the left of it, we've got show all available fonts and font collections. We'll go over that later. For now, let us adjust this one more. We can set the dimensions here. By default, it's set to point. Spacing between baselines. We only have one line, so let me deselect this. By the way, we can move it around and resize it, for example, holding Control. like any other object. And you can see the font or the overall size has been adjusted. I copy this, paste it in 2 lines, then Ctrl A, and now I adjust right here, spacing between baselines. Dimension is set to lines, and this just widens the gap between the lines that you've got. Also important is the next option. For that, let us delete this part and I add some simple text. It needs to be over multiple lines. Now press Ctrl A, size it down to 40 around. Let's keep around 40. And here's the alignment. So left align, center and right. And once again, you can still size it up and down. It's a simple object when it comes to these functions. Let us create yet another one. You can see the last style is stored. So we had a center align, and therefore everything we type in now is center aligned as well. Let us create yet another text. I'll press Ctrl D, and you can see we now have 2 objects. So they're not connected anymore. We've just copied one with Ctrl D. Just like we could copy rectangles and circles. And you can see at the bottom line it says that it's a text object, but the behavior is basically the same as with circles. We have super and subscript. This is, for example, important when you have chemical formulas, something like this, or you want to write a squared and so forth. Under spacing, we can adjust the space between the letters, spacing between the words. Kerning. The kerning, if you're a graphic designer, you know what that means. This is also for the spacing between the words in horizontal and vertical axis. Right here horizontal, and then we can also rotate it. Let me set it back to 0. Final options right here. We can rotate the text with this. And also adjust the direction, because in English, for example, we write from left to right, but in others we might write from right to left, so it's the opposite direction, and you can adjust it here. Having done all that, let us create a simple project. We'll start with a blank canvas, type in this text over multiple lines. Press Ctrl A, make it 72 points. We need Arial heavy. Keep the spacing between the baselines to 1. It's set to lines. We want to have it centered. Increase the spacing between the letters to 2.0. Then press T for the type tool. Select only with a left click drag the word Inkscape, make it red. Then the word project, make it greenish. And we want to make it purple. Try to recreate this to get a feeling for these basic functions of the type tool. As I've said, it's an important tool that you're going to use a lot, so you may want to be familiar with it. Let us go over a couple of simple text effects. This is just meant as an introduction to using Inkscape. I'm going to show you a couple of tricks that are often used. One of the most asked questions that I get on YouTube is how to make thin text bold. Let us have a thin text here. It's Arial normal. And I've copied it pressing Ctrl D. In this case it's easy because we have the styles. So you can use bold or even heavy, which is thicker than bold usually. But there are fonts that don't have these styles, or you might not have them installed. Let me, for example, pick Bradley Hand. And if I go to styles, you can see we only have normal. How can you make this thicker? Let me zoom in. We can go to Object, Fill and Stroke. And now we go to Stroke Paint. And we add a paint to the stroke. You can also hold Shift and click on the color swatch below. And then you can go to Stroke Style and adjust the stroke on the width. At some point, the results are going to be unusable, so be careful. But in general, this is a way to make thin text bold. Let me use, for example, 3 mm. This was the original. Let me copy it. And now we can compare it. I add the stroke to the bottom one. And even though it doesn't have this style, we were able to get around it by using this method. In this chapter, it's a good idea to directly try to recreate all of these projects. As I don't introduce new methods, I'll just use the methods that we already know and apply them. So try to recreate this, and then we'll start with the next one. Another question is, how can we reflect text? Let us start here. A simple reflection text, Arial bold. And now I press Ctrl D to copy it, and I've got the selector to active, and I can flip it right here. Now move it back up, zoom a little bit in, use the arrow keys until we have a seamless transition, and now select the bottom one, go to Object, Fill and Stroke. Use the opacity and go down. If I give it a background, you can see it a little bit better. I'll make this a rectangle, red color. I have to increase the opacity for it again. And now I'll place it below everything. Even better is if you apply gradient. Let us use the gradient tool. We'll add it to the fill and it's linear. In this case, it would have been better going from top down like this, but we can just keep it. So let me go from bottom to top, and now I'll flip it right here. Under fill and stroke, we can adjust our stops. So this is the alpha, it is set to 0, therefore it feathers out, or it fades out. That would be a better term. And you can adjust it right here. Once again, try to recreate this as well. Another usual question is, how can we add a drop shadow to text? There's not a direct function in Inkscape. Just like with Photoshop, you may know that you can directly add a drop shadow. Let me start right here. Yet again, Arial. I make it bold. I only want to have a fill, no stroke. Now we copy this, so we have it 2 times. Let me give the second one a different fill color. So we have red and black. I put the shadow one below, which is important, and it's a little bit diagonally below and to the right. Now we go to Object, Fill and Stroke. The black one is selected and I use the blur right here. You can also adjust it via opacity a little bit. And now we have a drop shadow. So you have to do it manually, but it works. Let me give it a white fill and we have this effect on a white background. Yet again, recreate it and then come back for the next text effect. Next effect, let me show you how you can easily create an outline text. We use the type tool as usual. I'll keep it to Arial, bold, but it works on every font. Let me size it up holding Control and Shift. I'll make it black. Object, Fill and Stroke, Stroke Paint, add a stroke, I'll make it red. Let me increase the width to 2 millimeters. We can see it. Look at the bottom line, it says text when we select it. And now we go to Path, Stroke to Path. And now at the bottom we have a group. So it's not a text element anymore, and we can press Shift Ctrl G or go to Object and Group. Now we have two objects selected. And if we drag on one of these, you can see we have the fill text and the stroke text. And the stroke text is now a simple outline. So once again, Object and Group or Shift Ctrl G. You can still change the colors, but keep in mind both have now a fill. So this is not a stroke anymore because we've converted it to a path. But there's one way to create a simple outline text. Let me show the next effect. It's a sliced text effect. I only want to have a fill, so let me get rid of the stroke and we'll slice it. For example, with the pen tool, we could slice it here. But I want to have it so that every letter is affected. So let me press Ctrl Z. And I need to go higher. Ctrl Z once again. Left click again, close this shape or close the path, and we have a shape. Let me give that a different fill. I want to copy this, so I press Ctrl D. And I also want to copy the text. Let me give that different colors so that you don't get lost here. I select the text, Ctrl D, different color. So we have 2 times the text, 2 times this triangle. I hold Shift, click on the text in a triangle, drag it downwards. Now I put the text behind the triangle. This is our setup. Let us select the top 2 objects, then Path, and use Difference. Now select the bottom 2, go to Path again, but this time use Intersection. And now we have our 2 text parts sliced, they have a different color. You can easily adjust that by giving that a different color. And you can move it around using, for example, the arrow keys. Once you've got your position and color, it's a good idea to select it both. Ctrl G to group it. Let me rotate it, just like this. Next up is a knockout text. We'll create a text, draw a rectangle on top. Put it to the bottom. Size it down a little bit. Maybe up to here. Select both Object, Align and Distribute. It's relative to page, align it in center. Now select both, go to Path, Difference. If I now create another object, put it below everything, so to the bottom, you can see the text is a knockout of this rectangle. You can still change the color of the rectangle, obviously, and you could put that, for example, on top of an image. Let me show you the final one that I would call easy text effects. I'll create a text, yet again Arial bold. Size it up holding Control, I'll make it black. You can create a simple offset by pressing Ctrl D and then adjusting the position of the copies and their size. So I'll put the original here, Ctrl D, I'll put the copy right there. But let me start with a lighter color. I'll select the both, use this gray, then the top part, I'll make it darker, again Ctrl D, reposition, make it darker, Ctrl D, reposition, make it darker. This is just by hand, but if you want to have specific positions, you can use the arrow keys. To do that, start here again with a simple text. My example is offset, make it the lightest color. Hold Ctrl when you size it up, then press Ctrl D, give it a different color, and then use the arrow keys now. I'll go 5 steps to the left, 5 upwards, Ctrl D, different color, 5 to the left, 5 upwards, and so forth. Once you've got what you want, again it's a good idea to select it all, Ctrl G to group, and now you have this offset effect with specific distances that are all equal. Once again, try to recreate all of these text effects directly, and then we'll move on with the next chapter. The next chapter is still a text effect chapter, but it's different because we need a path for it. Let us create some text. We'll call it text on a path. You can now create a path with many tools and even shapes. Let me use the Bezier tool, the pen tool. I'll left click, left drag. Let me get rid of the fill. I only want to have a stroke. Let me give this a red color. In older versions of Inkscape, it made a difference if the text was on top or the path was on top. In this version, it doesn't anymore, so you don't have to worry about it that much. But when you are still using an older version, make sure that the text is on top of the path by using the top function right here. Then select both, go to text and put on path. And now this text has been put on this line. You can drag it around, no problem with that. But if you want to adjust the position, then press Ctrl Z. You can, for example, use the type tool and add a couple of spaces. So white space, select both again, text put on path, and now it's in a different position. You can work your way around that like this. But I've also used a very extreme example here. Keep in mind that these two shapes are connected. So you can drag around the text, but the moment you drag around the line, the text will also be readjusted. To be able to detach that, you have to select both, then go to path, object to path, and now we have two individual objects, and we can even delete this path, and we have our text. Let me show you another example where I don't make this line that extreme. Again, type tool for the text, Bezier tool for the path. Something like this should do. Select both, text put on path. Now, if we select our line and we want to delete it, you can see that the text jumps back into its original shape. So you actually have to go to path, object to path to be able to delete your line without the text jumping back to its original orientation, you could say. Let me show you a use case. Just a simple example, we'll make a sentence. I'll make it smaller. Then I create a line that's a little bit wavy. Select both, text, put on path. Then select path, object to path, select the line, delete key. And this is usually what you want to have this effect for. Try it out yourself and recreate this. And then we'll start with related effects. For example, we can put text around a circle in the same way. So let me create an ellipse. I hold Control when I do, select both text, put on path, and there you go. We can rotate this, which is going to rotate the circle as well. And again, if you just delete it, the text will jump into its original orientation. So go to path, object to path, then delete the circle. And you've kind of created an arc for your text. Let me show you a text on a circle effect that goes in both directions. I'll copy this text, then I create a circle holding Control. It's easier to create two circles before you put it on a path, so let me deselect this, I copy it, pressing Ctrl D, and I make this red, so I have two circles. The red is selected, I hold Shift, click on the text, put on path. Let me rotate that up to here. Then again, path, object to path, we can delete the red one. Select the black, hold Shift, click on the other text, put it on the path, rotate it, and now you have readjusted the position a little bit to the right. Maybe up to here. And now we can delete this also after we've converted it to a path. Try to recreate this as well. And I show you final examples where you have to take care of something that I haven't yet talked about. We need yet another text element. Let me create a rectangle. Now select both text, put on path, and it doesn't work. And even if I readjust the position, so let me make the text be on top, it still doesn't work. So it's not a position issue. You have to be careful. Watch in the lower bar what it says when I select the rectangle. It's actually not a path, it's a rectangle, and therefore we can't put the text on it. We can now create a path. Let me enable the snapping. And here you can see there's the path and there's a rectangle. On the path, I can select the text put on path, and it works. But on a rectangle, it doesn't. But we can fix that by simply selecting the rectangle up front and then object to path. And this will turn the rectangle into a path, and now we can perform this action, and it works. We can also go to text and remove from path. but I should also select both. And there you go, our text is detached again from our object. So whenever you have an object, let me for example create a triangle that isn't a path, you have to first convert it to a path to be able to perform this operation. Otherwise it won't do. Here's a polygon, now we go to path, object to path, and now it says path. 3 nodes, so a triangle, and now it works. Play around with it, recreate the examples, and then come back for the next chapter. Let us talk about a more intermediate text effect. It's a multi-outline effect, and you can achieve it with 2 different methods. We'll start with the text, only a fill, no stroke. I size it up holding Control. Now you can hold Shift and click on a color swatch to give it a stroke. And this is basically an outline of our text. Let me go to Object, Fill and Stroke, and I make it a bit smaller. Maybe 2 millimeters. If we now want to have a stroke on top of that, we need to select it and go to Stroke to Path. We have a group, so Shift Ctrl G. We have our fill text and the stroke as 2 elements. I've selected the stroke element, and I can now hold Shift and click on a color swatch to add a stroke to this element. I'll go to Path, Stroke to Path, ungroup it again. I'll select the outer stroke right here, the greenish one. Hold Shift, click on the yellow color swatch, and again, Path, Stroke to Path, put it to bottom. So you can create these effects like this, and at some point you can see it right here, you have overlaps, there are fragments, so it doesn't work perfectly all the time. A better way to do it is to use a function called dynamic offset. You will still have fragments here and there, but they will not be as impactful. Let me start with a simple text yet again. And now I'll press Ctrl D to copy it, and I'll make the copy red. So I have 2 text elements now. I activate the node tool, and then I go to Path, click on Dynamic Offset. And you will have this small little diamond right here, and you can drag it with the nodes tool upwards. I've got the snapping disabled for now. That helps me in doing that, and I put it to the bottom. You can now select the original black text again, Ctrl D, give it a red color, Path, Dynamic Offset, use the nodes tool. Drag the diamond, so left click drag upwards. Put it to bottom. You have your second outline created. You can see there are still fragments from time to time, but it deals with overlaps way better than this stroke effect that I've shown you before. Let us add one more, and in this case it's easier to just copy the outline text, so we've already applied the dynamic offset. I'll press Ctrl D, give it a different color, and I can use the nodes tool directly as it already has the dynamic function. Hold it to bottom, and there you go. You have a multi-outline effect created with this simple method. And with a little bit of luck, Inkscape hasn't given you any fragments or glitches. Try to recreate it. Have your own version, use different color swatches, and then come back for the next chapter. Let us talk about yet another typical effect. It's a long shadow effect, and this is not just a text effect, it's a general effect that you can perform even on objects. Let us create a simple text. I size it up holding Control. Let me make it black for now. And you can see it's a text, and there's an extensions generate from path long shadow option. But if we click live preview, we're going to get an error message as we don't have a path element. As I've said, it's a text. So we first need to convert our text into a path. So just go to path, object to path when your text is selected. You can see at the bottom it's now path. And now we use the long shadow under extensions generate from path yet again. I'll check the live preview and it already works. You can adjust the length here. and the angle. When you've got what you want, confirm via apply and then close it. This is now a group, so we have to ungroup it, Shift Ctrl G. We have two objects now, the text. Right here I give it a different color and our long shadow. You can select the long shadow and see it's a group as well. And don't worry about these little fragments, we can get rid of that later on. I'll show you on a different example. And usually you want to have something like this, so the text is a little bit lighter and the shadow a little bit darker. I'll press Ctrl G to group them both. Now we'll work on a project. It uses the same function. We want to have a circle, hold Ctrl when you drag it. This for the background, so I'll put it aside for now. And we'll create a simple house icon or home icon here. I use the rectangle tool, you know that already. Select both rectangles, we'll align it properly. I'll select both again, path and difference. Now we want to create the roof. I use the polygon tool, 3 corners, hold Ctrl when you drag your triangle. Reposition it, resize it, holding Shift. Give it the same color. Then hold Shift, click on both elements, path and union. We need a chimney. Once again, rectangle tool. That's fine. Hold Shift, select both, path and union. Maybe we'll add a window. Use the rectangle tool. I'll reposition that slightly, but that's a good position. Select both elements, path and difference. We have our icon. When you resize it, hold Shift and Ctrl. Put it above the circle or put the circle below. Align both to center. So our icon is in center of the circle. Oh, I misclicked here. Let me press Ctrl Z. I want to resize it, holding Shift and Ctrl. Maybe do something like this. Select your home icon. It's a path, so we can directly go to extensions, generate from path, long shadow. Check the preview. I want to have a 45-degree angle. And for the length, make sure that it exceeds your circle. 80 is fine, but if you, for example, have only 30, this would be too short. So make sure this one is bigger than your circle. 80 is fine as I've said. We'll apply, then close it. Again, it's a group. Shift Ctrl G to ungroup. Give the home a different color. Select the shadow. It's a group as well. And we have these fragments. To get rid of them, select it. Shift Ctrl G. You can see all of the elements and then go to path and union. Now it's only one element and the fragments are gone. Circle, go to path, object to path. Now we have two paths. Shadow and circle, select both. So I have these two elements selected. And then go to path and use division. Now we have these two elements and we can add this color maybe. And this is usually the effect that's used to present icon designs. So it has this long shadow on a circle background, sometimes a rectangle background. And this I can recreate that. Pick a color combination that you like. Obviously try to recreate the icon and the shadow effect for text and for this icon, and then come back for the next chapter. Let me go through a couple of shorter chapters. First up, you've certainly seen a Lorem Ipsum text that's mostly used as a placeholder. Inkscape has an inbuilt generator. Under extensions, text, Lorem Ipsum. Let me check the live preview, and you can see it already. You can adjust the paragraphs, sentences, and that's all that you need here. It's a good idea to turn off the live preview while you adjust it, and then check it. If you apply it, you can close the menu and it will still be there. It's a text element. You can use the type tool, press Ctrl A for example, and then adjust the size. It was a little bit too big, but you get the idea. It's the regular text, and therefore it can be adjusted like regular text. For example, I make it red. So you don't need an external solution, it's inbuilt here. Second function that I want to show you is the inbuilt Spellchecker. Just go to text, check spelling. Here we have a Latin text and the system is set to English. So it's going to flag every single word. Get a drop down, I can adjust what kind of English, and under Edit Preferences. Here you can see the spell check, but more important is the interface. We've set our interface language to English in the beginning. Therefore, this is what's optional right here in the spell checker. If you have a different language, just make sure to set your interface language back to your native language, and then you can use the spell checker for that language. Let me add an English text where I purposely add a typo. Nothing too complicated, I'll size it up. And here you can see the last word, it should be example, but I've missed the M. Just start the spell checking and it gives you a couple of options. Except the first one, and now it's replaced. Let me add color and favorite, which is spelled differently depending on US or UK English. When you've got the drop down set to English in general, it's not going to flag it. But if you make it specifically UK, so here United Kingdom, it's going to give you color with OU and favorite with OU. And if you set it back to English, it's not going to flag it. And if you set it to US English, it's going to flag it. Just accept this. And this is how you can use the spell checker. You certainly ask yourself if you can install new fonts in Inkscape. This is possible, but it works not through Inkscape itself. It works through your system. In my case, I use Windows. So you have to install your fonts in general in your system. And then you should find it right here. Let me show you an example. I haven't yet installed this font. For example, here on thefont.com, you can find free fonts here. Let me just use Glodex, the first one, as an example. I download it. It's a zip folder. You can directly see. Important is TrueType or OpenType. I want to extract all before I do that. So let's just extract it. A new folder will pop up. Then use the TrueType. For example, double click on it. This window should open. Click on Install on the top. I've set my system to German, so don't be confused here, but on the top it should say Print, and then Install. Click on Install, and then it's installed in your system. You can close this. You will not be able to find it directly here in Inkscape. So if we check now our dropdown, Glodex is not here. And even if we go to text, there's an option text and font, we won't find it. We actually have to restart Inkscape. Let me do that. And now here is Glodex. I've installed it in my system and therefore Inkscape can find it now. But you have to close it and then restart it. And now we can use it right here. There you go, it works. Just as a project for yourself, go to thefont.com, maybe type in Glodex or use any other free fonts that you want to use. Here's a search bar, then download it, install it, refresh Inkscape and make sure that you can find it, and then come back for the next chapter. Let us talk finally about the binary operations. It's more like a presentation. We have these two rectangles placed on top of one another. For now, I'll disable the snapping. I'm going to select the first two, and you can see it's rectangles, but it's going to work on them like a path. So I go to path union, and now they are, you could say, morphed into one single object. So it's not two rectangles anymore, it's one, and therefore they get the same fill color. When I change it right here, you can see both of them are recolored. Second option is difference, and it's going to cut the one below with the shape above. So in this case, the red one cuts into the black one. Intersection leaves us with the overlap. So if I make this red one a little bit transparent on the fill and stroke opacity, there's our new, the smaller rectangle that we are left with after performing this intersection. Exclusion does the exact opposite. It basically cuts out the overlap and gives us everything that wasn't overlapping. Division, it also performs a cut, but it leaves us with the overlap as a second object. There are also path options, for example cut path. It seems like our shape has disappeared, but it doesn't have a stroke. This is why we can't see it. I give it a stroke, and it has also cut it. And if we give this one here a stroke, we have two objects. So that's the difference between these two. If I enable snapping again, they fit perfectly. But there's still a difference because we have two shapes above that are closed and two open shapes below. We can combine it, but this doesn't work on the shapes below. It works only on paths, so let me re-enable the snapping once more. I connect these two, select them, path and combine, and now we have one shape again. It also works here, but it's going to leave us with this middle line that we don't have at the bottom. I guess we have more path effects, break apart for example. This also works here. If we break it apart, we'll have our two paths again. It's not going to work on the union shape right here. If we break it apart, we don't have two rectangles again. Cut path is just four paths, and break apart also works on them. And we have a split path. Yet again, this works on a path, so let me select the path. Maybe this one right here. I'll go to path, combine, and then path, split path. And we have our two paths again. We could also use that. We have a fracture. If we perform that here, we will get three shapes. The overlap is now an isolated shape, and the other two that are not overlapping are shapes. And we have flatten. Let us perform it here, and we have these two shapes. Fracture doesn't work here either on the union shape that we've created first. My best advice is to just digest this. You don't have to learn it all in one go. Sometimes even I mix these different functions up. You're going to learn this stuff as you go and as you use Inkscape. I think, for example, union and difference is easily understood, but the other ones, you have to use them a couple of times. Let me show you one example. You can use these operations to create a simple inverse shape. I've got the Twitter logo right here. It's an SVG. I'll make sure that I ungroup it first, Shift-Ctrl-G, and then object to path, stroke to path, just to make sure that we have a path. Now I create a rectangle below, I select both, once again, path object to path stroke to path is what I've performed just for security, and then path difference, and we've created this cutout. And if you want to inverse the cutout and have the Twitter logo again, just use yet another rectangle. Let me give it a different color. I put it to the bottom, select both, so our cutout and the blue rectangle, and then go to path, and all you have to use is exclusion. Let me give it a light blue, or like a sky blue, something like this. This would be one use case for these operations, but as I've said, there are many, and you'll have to use them a couple of times to understand them fully, so don't worry if you don't remember all of them right away. We'll use a couple of them in future chapters. For you to practice, just go to a vector website, for example SVG repo, download a vector, try to create this inverse shape, and then come back for the next chapters. Let us continue with rotation. There are two main ways to use it. First up, I've got the snapping enabled, and I use the ellipse tool. I will control when I drag it. I have a circle, let me make it red. You already know that. Let me set it down a little bit, holding Shift and Control. If I click on it again, we have the rotate function, and we have this rotation center that we can drag around. So if I put it right here to the bottom of the circle and rotate it, it's going to get rotated around this point. If I put it outside, it's going to get rotated like so. This is called rotation center. So you can see that right here under snapping. You want to have it checked when you want to make this snap, for example, to the center of this object. So I drag it back, and now it snaps in position. If I rotate it, it's a circle, so you can't really see it, but if I make it a rectangle and I rotate it around its center, there you go. I'll drag it to the bottom right, rotate it. This also applies to text, so it works on every element in Inkscape. I click on it again, there is my rotation center, I'll put it to the bottom right, and this text gets now rotated like so. Here's the rotation center of the text. Let us work on a specific example, and I'll show you a second way to rotate. It's a good idea to recreate this. So open your Inkscape, do it yourself. I'll create a rectangle, make it bluish. I want to have a dark blue. Maybe something like this. Now I use the star tool, 5 corners. I hold Control when I drag it. I want to start with this shape. Let me make this yellowish, golden. It's a little bit too big, so I have to size it down. And here's something that Inkscape hasn't done well. In earlier versions, the selection was way easier to do. But anyway, I hold Control and Shift when I do that. Now click on it again. I have my rotation center repositioned, and I put it in center of the rectangle. And now I can rotate this star like this and create a circle of stars. And I can simply do that by pressing Ctrl D and then rotating the copy. Once again, it doesn't allow me to select this properly. So let me show you an easier way to do it. We've got one shape here. We've repositioned our rotation center. I select the star, go to Object, Transform. Don't worry about all of these functions. We want to go over rotate. And then we'll set an angle. Make it 30 degrees. You can press enter or click on apply and it's going to get rotated. You can change the direction to counterclockwise. And now press Ctrl D and apply. So always Ctrl D, then apply, Ctrl D, then apply, and so forth until we've closed this circle. I believe in the original European Union flag the stars are a little bit smaller. So let me start again and I create the stars first. You find a good size and position. But this one should work. So again, 30 degrees, Ctrl D always, apply, repeat until your circle is filled. You create a rectangle, make it bluish, and I put it below the stars. Find the center position, it should snap. And this is how you can create this European Union flag. Try to recreate it, try to use the transform menu and do it manually. Then come back for the next chapter. It's time to introduce another tool, and this is the Shapebuilder tool right here. For it to work we need a shape. Let us create, just by hand, rectangle, ellipse, star. I'll give that different colors. And I want to get rid of the stroke. But you can see all three shapes now. I'll select them all, then I activate the Shapebuilder. Check the cursor. We have a plus and minus mode, but sometimes I've noticed that even when you have the plus mode active in the top menu, there's still a minus right next to your cursor. So pay attention to the cursor. Now there's a plus sign. And when I now left click drag, I can build these shapes. Let us use the minus first, and this is how I can delete shapes. I'll select it again. This time I want to add them. I only click on the center one, confirm, and this is all that we've got. I'll press Ctrl Z, select it all again, Shapebuilder tool, plus mode, and now I left click drag, and this is going to connect shapes. So we can create something like this. And these other two shapes, they will be excluded as we haven't dragged or we haven't left clicked on them. Let me show you a real example. You should recreate this yet again. We'll start with a circle, hold Ctrl, go to 45-degree angle. Snapping is enabled, which is important. Ctrl D, hold Ctrl when you drag this copy down and make it snap to the first one. Then Ctrl D again. I have a second circle now on top here, and I hold Shift and Ctrl when I sized it down. Copy this one, Ctrl D, drag it upwards. Now we need a big circle, go to the center, hold Ctrl, drag it until it exceeds the other ones, put it to bottom, and if you size it down now, hold Shift and Ctrl. Now select it all. Activate the Shapebuilder tool plus mode. Connect these two, and then left click on the center ones. Confirm. Let me give everything a black stroke. So I'll hold Shift, click on the black color swatch, and you can see how this creates the yin and yang symbol. I selected all, Ctrl G. Let me squeeze in a little bit of a side note. In the beginning I promised that we would go back to this. When we reach the Shapebuilder tool, we want to go to File, New from Template, and here's a specific Shapebuilder category. We can find a couple of presets, you could say. Let us just select the Celtic knot, and we'll create from template. It might take some time, but here it is now. When you do that, let me close the export right here. When you do that, you can use the selection tool or the nodes tool to select a couple of these. But if you want to activate the Shapebuilder tool, it might give you a warning message. So first, you have to select this one, and then you can select the Shapebuilder tool, use plus minus mode. Let me use plus, and I'll connect a couple of shapes just to show you that this works. I will keep this, I'll confirm, and now these are the shapes that we can use. So these inbuilt templates, they come in handy when you already know what you want to do. You don't have to create the basic shapes anymore. And now we'll continue with another project. I'll show you yet another example. We'll start with a rectangle. Make it rounded corners. Ctrl D to copy. Click on it again, hold Ctrl when you rotate it. Snapping should help putting it into position. Select both, Ctrl D, rotate while holding Ctrl. Reposition. Select all. We don't want to have a fill, so click on the X. Then I use the Shapebuilder tool, plus mode. Click on the 4 outer ones and the center one, then switch to minus and delete the outer ones. Confirm, and this is the command icon created using the Shapebuilder tool. Once again, recreate it, then come back for the next chapter. Let us get into the next bigger chapter, and it's about images. I'll use an image from Unsplash. I've already linked to that, so I've already told you about it, but check it out yourself. You can use these photos for free, commercially and personally. I've downsized one of them here. You can just drag and drop it onto canvas. This image will pop up. For now, I would advise you to simply confirm via OK. And here is our image now. But keep in mind that Instagram is not the best software to deal with images. Something like GIMP or Photoshop would be better. But we can do a couple of things. Number one is, let me resize it. You can see width and height in pixels, and I can resize it like so. And if I hold Control, it keeps the aspect ratio. I can hold Shift and transform it. And if I press Ctrl Z, I will have the original back. I can release all keys and transform it as well. We can also copy these, like every element in Inkscape, just press Ctrl D. Let me keep a copy right here on the left. And we'll work on this one. We have a couple of filters that I haven't yet talked about. It's a lot, and most of them are one-click options. For example, image effects, age, just left-click, and it's applied. You can press Ctrl Z to undo. There are also some that have these dots after their name, and this means that a menu will pop up where you can adjust the intensity, sometimes the colors, and additional details. I have made videos about most of these filters. You can find them in my Inkscape playlist. Just go to my channel homepage. So I'm only going to go over a couple. Here, film grain is a one-click option again, so left click and it's applied. And as I've said, the ones that have 3 dots, they have a menu. Let us, for example, open Posterize, check the live preview, and now you have 2 sliders to adjust. When you want to keep something, always apply before you close. One effect that might be interesting to use, it's also easy to use, can be found, let me check, right here under Shadows and Glows. There's the drop shadow. If you check the live preview, you can directly see that we have a shadow applied to our image. You can adjust the position via offset and the intensity via blur radius, and even set a different color than black. As I've said, don't forget to apply before you close it. And this is now part of the image. So this filter is embedded. You can see that right below. There it says it, image, embedded, filter, drop shadow. Let us copy another one from the original. Another effect that might be interesting. You can apply textures. Just left click and they will be added to images. There are quite a lot to choose from and all of them are one-click options. Some effects are self-explanatory, others you just have to try it out on your photo and see. Let us, for example, use the drawing. The results always depend on the photo that you use. Sometimes they work perfectly and sometimes you get results that are honestly unusable. It's a hit and miss here and there. Let us talk about a solarization. It's an effect often used with portrait shots, but we can also use it here for a car. It creates these weird effects and you can rotate the color here, but it's an often used effect. And let me show you how you can create a grayscale. This simply turns it into black and white, and you can adjust the RGB channels and the lightness right here, but only do minor adjustments or the content of your photo will vanish. Let us colorize it. We can use that to create duotone effects. Both colors are applied via harsh and normal light, and you can pick a different color right here. It's a simple color wheel, but you have to uncheck and check the live preview again to see this effect applied. Finally, we also have blurs. Let me add a simple blur. In general, once again, I would use GIMP for photo editing and for jobs that include photos. And Inkscape is the better tool when it comes to vector stuff, icon design, illustrations, and also text design to some degree. Be careful with your extensions. There are some options that sound like they would work on images as well, but they don't. For example, here we have a grayscale yet again and an HSL adjustment. But if you apply it, it doesn't work on images. Good idea is for you to download a photo from Unsplash and try out a couple of textures, a couple of filters and effects, a Gaussian blur, give it a drop shadow. Make it a duotone, just for practice sake. And then I'll talk about a final chapter which deals with images. We can turn this into a vector by using path trace bitmap. In the preview window you can see what it does. We can do a single scan for black and white, multicolor or pixel art. Let us stick to single scan. This entire menu is surely for intermediates, so I'm going to glance over this. Important is that you can see in the preview window what's happening, and if you think that nothing has happened, just click on Update Preview below. Make sure that Live Update is checked, and then play around with the sliders or the detection mode in this case. Once you've got what you want, or once you think that you've got what you want, just click on Apply. And this will trace the bitmap. It's placed on top of the image. And I can drag this downwards. And you can see we now have kind of like a silhouette of the most prominent elements in our image. And this can now be adjusted using the nodes tool. And we can give this a different fill color. We can add a stroke. It's a regular object now that we are used to from using Inkscape. Do that as well. Download a different photo from Unsplash, import it, trace the bitmap, try to change its fill color, and then come back for the next chapter. Let us now talk about a tool that I don't use. It's the paint bucket tool. We'll create two elements, and let me give that different colors. You can see that there's an overlap. The only thing that's positive about the paint bucket tool is that you can take this, set it to visible colors, leave the rest as it is, and then pick maybe a reddish color. Or yellow. You can see that up here under fill, it has changed, and even the icon has changed. And now left click. This one's still selected, so if I change the color, it will be changed. And then I left click on the rectangle, both are orange. And it has not just recolored them, it has given us new shapes, and it even took care of the overlap. So this was the original arrangement. And for the rectangle, it created a cutout, you could say. Let's do it again. This time the order is reversed, and we've got a cutout for a circle right here. Which is the only thing that I kind of like about this tool. But when it comes to recoloring, I like to use the swatches anyway. I select these objects and then just left click on the swatches. But I wanted to cover this tool because I don't want to leave you guessing. I've made a specific video about it. If you want to know more, once again, check my playlist. But this is all that I wanted to cover for beginners when it comes to using this paint bucket tool. No project this time. Let us just dive into the next chapter. Let us talk about another tool and directly create a project. This is called the tweak tool. We need a text element for it. I make it drip, Arial heavy, and I size it a little bit up, holding Control. We want to start here. So now you can see it's a text element. You definitely want to turn it into a path first with path object to path, because otherwise Inkscape likes to crash when you now use the tweak tool. If you deselect everything and use this tool right here, it's not going to work. You have to have your elements selected that you want to perform these tweak effects on, and then use the tweak tool right here below the paint bucket. And now you can see I can left click and go over this text element, and there's something happening here. Let us go over the basics. At first the width, it adjusts how much is affected, so how big the area is. Force is the intensity for this effect. I make it bigger and you can see we have a way bigger text deformation. Let me use 70. This is only the first mode. The other modes can be found up here. So this one was for push parts. We can also shrink them, like so. You can also press Shift and it will switch between push and shrink. Let me shrink it a little bit here for the eye letter. Are we going somewhere? Here's one roughen. I won't use that because it's very buggy. You can see it right here. All of a sudden my text has vanished. Let me press Ctrl Z. I do it again. Once again it has vanished. So this tweak tool is very buggy and I don't like to use it if I can achieve the effect in a different way. There are also modes for adjustments when it comes to color or copying and many different randomization techniques. It all sounds good, but the problem is there are just too many bugs attached. If you want to use it, definitely make sure that you are working on a path. So this is why I used objects to path right here on the path, because if you don't do that, Inkscape directly crashes, at least on my CPU and at least for version 1.3. So be careful with that. Just for practice purposes, try to recreate such a drip text effect. Pick maybe a bluish color for it and then come back for the next chapter. Let us go over some extensions. First up, we can create barcodes. There's an inbuilt generator right here under render. Let us start with a classic. There are different types. I don't claim to be an expert here, but the EAN and then the number, it determines how many digits or how many characters it can carry. For example, EAN2 needs 2 digits, and if you have more, in my example 3, it's going to give me a warning message. EAN5 is for 5 digits. And there's also a type that allows you to paste URLs and even longer codes. Let me use this one, code 128. I paste the URL of my YouTube channel. Live preview is checked and I apply it. And this is what we get. It's a group, so I can press Shift Ctrl G. And for example, get rid of the text, the URL, and then transform the barcode a little bit and group it again. Do this just for practice purposes. Maybe you have a link to your own social media. Try to create a barcode out of it and see if everything works. Another form of barcode is the QR code. It's not necessarily made of bars, it's more like a square circle, but it works the same way. We can add text or a URL, some form of information right here. Check the live preview and you can read more about the link that's given here. What's important, you can set it to circle or square on the shapes, and smooth you can adjust the style a little bit. Character encoding, Latin 1 or UTF-8 should be your choice. UTF-8 is the standard Unicode for web browsers, and I would keep the size to auto. It sets it automatically to the size that's needed for the information in the text, and then apply it. You can close it, and here's your QR code. Once again, pick your own social media and try to recreate it, and afterwards see if it works with a QR code reader on your smartphone. Next up, I wanted to show you a helpful tool that's, I don't want to say hidden, but you have to use it under extensions. I'll create two circles, and the second one is way smaller. I'll select them both. These are circles. I want to go to path, object to path first. Now we have two objects of type path. And under extensions generate from path, we can use an interpolation. And this gives us basically a blending tool that's inbuilt in Inkscape. Let me check the preview. You can see that right here. I can adjust the steps. So now I have 9 circles. The method can be adjusted here. It doesn't make a huge difference in our case, but it's worth it checking it out when you use a different project. The exponent, it changes the distance between the circles. For most projects, you want to keep it to 1 to have this equal distancing. Don't forget to apply it. And these are regular objects. I can press Shift-Ctrl-G to ungroup and have them like this. Let me make this small one a little bit lighter, and I'll do it again. Keep in mind it's already a path, as I've dragged it out of these circles that we've already turned into path. Again, I use the interpolation, check the live preview, and this time I also check interpolate style. And now it not only blends the object's shape, but also its style. Let me make it 20 steps, and we have a nice blend created with this interpolation. There are lots of extensions more. I've made videos about almost all of them in my Inkscape playlist, my YouTube channel. Once you're done with this video, check it out. We will go over the NiceCharts, but everything else I don't want to cover here. We've talked about the long shadow. And I've talked about the color right here. We couldn't use it on images, but we can use it here on our objects. If I desaturate it, it's now black to light gray. So you can use it here, not on images. But that's all I wanted to cover for beginners when it comes to extensions. Once again, if you have a specific question, then check out my playlist. Try to recreate this blend. So make it 20 circles, blend the style and the shape size, and then come back for the next chapter. As I've promised, we wanted to go over the NiceCharts a little bit more in depth. We can find them under render. There it is. Just check the live preview. And under data, I've still stored the values that we've used earlier to create this pie chart. Well, let me first zoom out a little bit so that we can see better. We want to start with this YouTube 30, Twitter 40, Instagram 30, and now I add comma, TikTok 20. This is now more than 100, and it's going to directly calculate the new relative values. So it's 120 in absolute values, and then YouTube 30 in absolute would only be 25% of the circle, and that's exactly what we see for the YouTube section in our pie chart. But we can also create bar charts with it and even stack charts. So this is inbuilt in Inkscape, makes it easier to create these charts. You can import your data right here if you have a file, a CSV file. This should be the data format usually. We'll use these files, very simple, try to recreate it. Labels, font, self-explanatory, font size, let me size it down to 10, and the font color below as a hex code. The value, we can show them. For now they overlap with our text, but we can fix this and adjust more under charts right here. At first I want to have it horizontally. Bar length and width is once again self-explanatory. Pi radius, we don't have that here. But bar offset, we have it. It's the distance between these bars. If I make it bigger, we have a bigger gap. Stroke width, we don't have a stroke here, but we could make it bigger if we had one. Offset between the text, so YouTube, Twitter, and so forth, and the bars. Can we adjust it here? Let me add the values, and now they're actually on the bars. When we draw it horizontally, let me get back to a vertical, and you can see now we could at least see these labels and the values a little bit better. If you ever run into problems when it comes to overlaps, don't worry. These are all elements that this render menu will create, and we could adjust them later on manually. The color scheme, there are some inbuilt options, for example blue, gray, and so forth. And yet again, we can select them later on and give them manual colors using the color swatches. We'll start here with blue and we'll reverse the colors. That makes it a little bit lighter. We want to have a drop shadow. And then confirm it. Once again recreate it using the same values. And now you can see we can left click drag. We have our text elements, the bars, and even the drop shadow is an individual element. So you can adjust all of that like regular objects afterwards anyway. Give these bars different colors, different positions for the values, whatever. Select it all, Ctrl G, and put it aside. And now let me show how we could create a donut chart using this menu. Again, extensions, render NiceCharts. We use the same values, and we want to make it a pie chart. We'll keep the rest and just apply. For pie charts, it creates a background. So if I drag this out of here, you can see right here, it's a white circle. So I hold Shift and click on my 4 segments first. All are selected, and I can drag them to the right. Now I can select the white one and the drop shadow and delete both. Let me drag these 4 segments back to the center, up to here. And if we want to create a donut chart now, we can easily use the ellipse tool, go to the center, it snaps because the snapping is enabled, and hold Ctrl and Shift. I'll make it red. It is selected. I'll hold Shift and click on a segment. Both are selected now, and I use Path and Difference. And this gives us a cutout in this segment. I have 4 segments, so I need 4 cutouts. I press Ctrl Z, then 3 times Ctrl D. I have 4 red circles. One is selected, hold Shift, click on a segment, path difference, hold Shift, click on red and a second segment, and so forth, and always path difference. And now we've turned this pie chart into a donut chart. Select all, Ctrl G, and you're good to go. Try to recreate this as well, and then we'll move on from the extensions. There are a couple more tools that we can talk about. Next up, I wanted to cover another tool. It's the Pages tool down here. It's simple. It gives you circles and rectangles on your page. You can adjust the margin with the circles. You can see that in the second input field right here. And the squares are for adjusting the page size. You can move the entire page around like this, so left click drag. But when it's bluish, you'll adjust the margin right here. You can also left click there and adjust it numerically. Let me set it back to 0, and you can add a bleed. So if that's needed. To the left we have our pages layout. You can flip it from horizontal to vertical and back. And the defaults are saved right here, for example desktop 1920 x 1080. If you want to make a video, this is what you need. A0 is obviously the biggest, but we'll switch back to A4 and I'll flip it again. The other functions are easy to understand. We have a function to delete a page and to move objects with the page if we have objects on it. But let me first show you, we can drag this around. As I've said, left click drag. These outlines are going to get greenish and you know that you have your page. If you want to add a page, there's a function on the top left. When this tool is active, it's simply called new page. Left click. And it will be given the same layout that the first one had. You can see page 1, page 2. You can jump around with this third input field. So if you have like 100 pages in an entire project, you can use that. Let me delete it with this function. Now I'll add an object, move with page is active. And if I uncheck this, the object stays. And it's only going to get dragged with the page once at least a little bit of it is part of your page. So there has to be an overlap. When you create a new page, the object is not going to get copied, but this is already it when it comes to using this tool. If you want to have some practice, just create 5 pages, make them have different layouts. For videos HD, A0, A4, and a letter, and then add an object and drag it around to get yourself familiar with all of these functions. The next tool isn't necessarily a beginner tool, but I wanted to include it because it's interesting. It's the spray tool. For it to work, we need an object. Let me create a rectangle. I'll hold Control. Let us start here. You can see I can adjust the color. Then I use the spray tool, and the two modes are interesting. One is for copy, the other for clone. Let me start with a clone, and then left click drag, and it creates copies as it seems, but these are clones. So if I recolor the first one, the other ones will get the same color. Just like I had select them all. And you can see I can't even recolor the clones. And you can see at the bottom it says so it's not a rectangle, it's a clone of our rectangle. And this is why everything that affects the original will also affect the clone. Let us create another rectangle, spray tool. And now I'll switch to copy, left click drag. I recolor the first one and the other ones are left unaffected. And there's a difference between a copy and a clone. For the most part, you want to have the copy mode active for the spray tool. But just to show you the difference. Don't worry too much about the other modes for now. There's one for path effects and one for deleting. The width adjusts the size of this circle So I can make it bigger and now it affects a bigger area. Let me increase the amount and we have more rectangles when I left click drag. We can rotate it by 20 degrees. You can see that right now it doesn't create more ones because I've set the overlap to 100% offset. We'll start again. Rotation 30, and here is our overlap, prevent overlapping objects. I uncheck it and now we can create these overlaps. I check it, let me make it 20%. So 20% overlap is possible, everything else is not. There are more modes right here. Best way to understand them is to check them out, but I don't want to go in depth here. I once again want to refer you to my Inkscape playlist. Instead, we're going to create a project now. We will start with a rectangle as a background. Deselect it, then use the ellipse tool. Hold Ctrl when you drag it to have a perfect circle. Adjust it to such a size, make sure it's selected, then activate the spray tool. We want to be in copy mode. Rotation 0, doesn't make sense for circles to rotate anything. Width, set it to 10, amount 20, let me go to 30, and we want to have the offset to 25%. Then left click drag and fill your background with these random circles. Once you've got it, make sure all circles are on this background, then Ctrl A, hold Shift, click on the background to deselect it. All circles are selected and now use the tweak tool. Adjust width to 10, force to 100 and use the second mode right here for jitter the colors. For jitter the color of selected objects. HSLO is all selected. This is hue, saturation, lightness, and opacity. Let me adjust the width to 50, then left click drag. You can uncheck, for example, the lightness or the hue to randomize the result a little bit. Go over this again, and now you have this random dot design thanks to this jitter effect. As always, recreate this project and then come back for the next chapter. There are a couple of tools more. I don't want to talk about them in this beginner video in depth. I'll just introduce them quickly. Some of them, for example the connector tool, are not really tools that you're going to use. You can use it to draw connections for diagrams, for example. But to be honest, I've never used it when I've created something like this. Maybe like a simple box diagram, I'll just use the Bezier tool and create my lines like this. This is why I don't want to talk about this tool in detail. If you're interested, yet again, I have a video in my playlist, but this is not really something the typical beginner needs. The second one that I haven't talked about much is the mesh tool, because this is a more intermediate tool. Yet again, I've used it in tutorials on my playlist, but you can basically use it like a gradient and add it, for example, to circles right here. Let me create a rectangle and I apply it to the fill. And now you have these corner points, you could say, of the mesh and transform them. If you left click and drag, it's going to give you a curve and this gradient that's added to the shape, rectangle in this case, it gets transformed as well. I don't think that is something beginners would use or need, and the use cases are very small in general. So it is more intermediate to advanced stuff. Another one that I haven't yet talked about in detail is the measure tool. You can already see what it does. Left click and drag and you can measure, for example, the diagonal line here of this rectangle. There are a couple of options here. Convert to item is interesting and might be useful for beginners, so let me show this. If I unselect the measure tool, all of these values, they vanish. If I reselect it, they are there. But if you want to keep them, you need to go to convert to item, left click, I unselect the measure tool, and now these values are an element that was created by Inkscape, so that we can keep this even when the measure tool is not active. But this is all that I wanted to show you about this in my beginner tutorial. And finally, I haven't yet talked about the eraser tool, and the reason is I like to use the binary options. Eraser tool is more for illustrations. It's certainly useful if this is your thing. You can just left click drag and it creates, you could say, cutouts of your tools. You can also use it to delete entire elements and clip from objects. Once again, I don't think that beginners are really in need of this tool, but under width you can see you can adjust the size, you can adjust the cap. And yet again, you will find a video of this in my playlist. No project for these tools. Instead, we're going to move on to chapter 43. And we're talking about align and distribute. I'll simply create a couple of rectangles and ellipses. And then I go to Object, and there's the Align and Distribute menu. We've already used it, but I haven't talked much about it. Ignore grid and circular for now. We only want to use Align. This is something that's useful for beginners. We have these 3 red rectangles and a drop down for relative to. Let me make that last selected. And now instead of selecting them all, I deselect, then I hold Shift and click on them one by one. The last one is now on the left. And now I can align the other ones or center them properly according to this one. You can bring them all into a horizontal line, just like this. Then let's go to page, and I do it again, and they will be in center of the page. The drop down, it determines what is used to align and distribute the objects to. Let me reposition that, and you can see the gap between middle and right is way smaller than left and middle. Now I use last selected, and I use distribute right here. And now the gap is the same between left center and center right. We'll work on the circles. We'll make it biggest object, which is our ellipse on the left. We'll align it. Make it smallest, which is going to be this one on top. There are many more functions, but I think that this is what beginners need for the most part, so don't worry too much about the rest. It might be overwhelming to go over all of this here. Let me show you something else for our ellipses. We can also group certain elements. Let me, for example, group the 2 circles on the right. I hold Shift and click on both, or I use left click and drag to have them both covered, then Ctrl G to group. And now, even though it's 4 elements, we have one group, and this makes it 3 elements. And if we distribute this now, the group will be unaffected. If you want to have it affected, Shift Ctrl G to ungroup, select it all, distribute again. And now 4 of these objects were distributed. This principle comes in handy when we, for example, work on a simple design project. Let us create a circle on this blank canvas. I hold Ctrl when I drag it and make it yellow. Create a second ellipse, this time without holding any keys. Ctrl D to copy, we have two eyes, and now I use this principle. So hold Shift, select both, Ctrl G to group, align it, and if the position isn't what you wanted, just Shift Ctrl G, reposition, select both again, Ctrl G to group, align it once more. Let us also create a mouth, just for practice purposes. We use the Bezier tool. What we need are guides. Just drag one from top to bottom and from left to right. Then use the Bezier tool, left click. And left click drag. Hold Ctrl when you do. Then hold Shift, click on a black color swatch. If it hasn't stroked yet, then release Shift, click on the X to get rid of the fill. Ctrl D to copy, flip it, reposition it to the center. Then hold Shift, left click, so that both lines are selected. Path and combine. We want to make it a bit thicker, so object, fill and stroke, stroke style. And we have a round cap. But let me make it a little bit smaller again, like 7. I select the yellow circle, hold Shift, click on a black color swatch to give it a stroke, make it 10 millimeters. Select all, Ctrl G, and you've got your smiley. Recreate it and then come back for our final chapter. One more thing that might be helpful for beginners is the pattern menu. We'll create a rectangle, object, fill and stroke. We are under fill, and we'll add a pattern. Most important is the drop down right here. You can click on all patterns and they will all be listed. And there are also categories, so if you have something specific in mind. Let us, for example, start with a geometrical one. We can scale it, connect X and Y via the link icon or disconnect. You can change the orientation. And you can offset it. And you can also add a gap. Finally, there's an edit on canvas function. If you click on it, you can do all of these adjustments right here on the canvas with these icons. I like to use the sliders and values though, but this is also possible. Let us create our final project. You need a circle, hold Ctrl when you drag it with the ellipse tool, object, fill and stroke. We under fill, and we'll add a pattern. What we want to add is an Asian pattern. we'll choose this one. You can see X and Y are linked. We want to keep it like this. And then we'll go down to 0.15. We'll change the orientation slightly to 30. Keep the offset and gap to 0. And then we're good here. And that's it. You've made it through. It's a longer video, but I hope it has really helped you. I've been getting on your nerves with my Inkscape playlist a couple of times. You can find it right here on my channel at Michael Brick. And there under Home you will find the graphic design section. All my Inkscape tutorials for beginner should be the first playlist. Currently I have around 460 videos in here. When new versions drop or when people have questions in the comments, I'll add new videos and you can access all of them here. And they should answer most of the questions that especially beginners have. So check it out. But I don't want to leave without giving people a shout out. So if you want to learn more about Inkscape and you haven't found it on my channel, check out Logos by Nick, for example. I'm going to link all of these channels in the video description below. But he does a lot of Inkscape tutorials TJ free as well. There are some right here. Davis Media Design. Ardent Designs is a great channel when you're a little bit more intermediate. So when you've worked through my playlist, through my beginner video, check these designs out and you will find more intermediate Inkscape tutorials and also Iron Echo Design. And before I forget, there's also a channel by Martin Owens at Doctormo. It's about Inkscape development. So when new features drop, you'll get info right here. Check it out. Maybe it's interesting to you. If you deep dive into Inkscape, it certainly will. Once again, I'll link to all of them, so check them out, maybe subscribe, and then you've got lots of more videos and tutorials to work through. I hope this video was helpful. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.